Chapter 11. Remember the Heroes. Jack looked from the gathered crowd of cowering people in the train car back to Jonas. Stay with them. I'll be right back. Where are you going? We have some things to discuss. Jack said nothing and moved up towards the ramp as he drew his sidearm from its holster. The ramp was already down, with several of the gang members having fled up and out. Jack headed up the ramp and into the night air as a gentle breeze rolled past. He looked around for a minute. He could see the light from down below pouring up through a hole in the ground about 30 yards away or so. The ground around it smoked lightly and the grass was still smoldering in places. Scattered around the area were a few bodies, thugs now scorched to a crisp. "Odale, hey pendejo," came a soft whisper from the concrete barricade not too far off. Jack turned to see Jorge, his head poked out from around a corner of the barricade. Jack smirked and moved towards him. "You okay?" said Jack as he approached. Jorge was wide-eyed and pale from panic. Jack couldn't blame him. This was all getting very weird. "Yeah, I think so. What the fuck, pendejo? You never said you knew fucking Superman or whoever that cabron is. He tried to fucking kill me." Jack raised an eyebrow. He'd seen how the guy moved, how fast he was, and a little of what he was capable of. He wasn't sure if he had or hadn't tried to kill Jorge, but either way, it sure looked like he had to the Jorge. "Yeah, no clue. But we're good," Jack said earnestly. "You're fucking right, we're good. I'm getting the fuck out of here." "Good. Get back to your kid and old lady, all right? And thanks." Jorge paused and nodded. "Yeah, well, didn't have much of a choice, but this shit was fucked up. I ain't about all this shit they're doing either. Drugs, guns, theft, sure. But this is fucking loco." Jack nodded. "Besides, don't get to see a fucking superhero every day, and when Captain America, military man or whatever you're calling yourself, says he needs your help, well..." Jack grinned and nodded. "Get out of here. I got this," said Jack as he lightly jerked his head to the side, signaling for Jorge to leave. Jorge smiled. "Hey, you need a Commissioner Gordon or some more intel in the future, you come talk to me for information, right? See you later, superhero." With that, Jorge turned and began to walk away towards the hospital as Jack raised his gun into the air, pointing it at the night sky. He let loose several rounds as Jorge flinched and spun. "Hijo de puta, maldita sea." Jorge jumped and spun around to face Jack. "Why don't you fucking wait until I'm further off? Stupid gringo," swore Jorge. He sighed and shook his head before walking away at a brisk pace. Jack laughed and holstered his gun as he turned and headed back inside. That should get the attention of somebody, at least the on-duty cop over in the hospital parking lot, or the hospital security. In any case, the cops were sure to be on the way. Jack headed back down the ramp and was a bit surprised to see Jonas surrounded by the survivors. They were a group of various ethnicities. He was a bit surprised to see some people in business suits, church clothes, and quite a few in hospital gowns. Jonas had opened the rest of the train cars that were down in the bunker and was now seated on the bumper of one of the cars and addressing the group. A wide smile was plastered across his face and several of the others. Many of them looked weak and frail, but they were smiling as he spoke to them, switching from English to Spanish flawlessly as he carried on and tried to cheer them up with light jokes and conversation. A few of the people turned around to see Jack as he approached, and Jonas looked up with a smile. "And there he is. Your hero. The man that saved you all. Say hi to them." Jonas's eyes looked from Jack's face down to the Sergeant Major symbol spray painted on the chest of his vest. "Sergeant Major." Several people began to applaud. A few others moved in to hug him or shake his hand. Jack was suddenly surrounded as the profuse thanks and praises poured out to him from teary-eyed and tired faces, overcome with joy. Several of those thanking him were openly sobbing as they tried to thank him for their rescue. Jack didn't really know what to say. It was all a bit overwhelming, but also refreshing, heartwarming, and touching. He'd been thanked for his service before and thanked for his work in the field, but this felt different. He remembered coming home after his injury, how he'd felt. It all felt wrong. This felt right in a strange way. He swallowed hard, smiled back, and returned the handshakes. He was caught off guard by the first hug, but he returned several of the others and wrapped them in a single powerful arm and gave them gentle claps on the back. This was why he did the job. Not for the thanks, but for moments like these where people realized they were now safe. He did this to protect people. Jonas stood at the back of the pressing crowd, smiling as Jack looked to him and raised an eyebrow. "You're safe, you're safe." "Thank you, gracias," Jack said as he tried to stem the press of survivors. "The police on their way. Just stay here until they arrive. All right. If any of you need medical aid, there is a hospital right across the street. Those of you who can make sure to help the others." Jack moved through the crowd towards Jonas and stopped a foot or so from him as he leaned in to speak, but Jonas cut him off. "Follow me." Jack looked annoyed but nodded. Jonas stood and hovered gently up into the air, making the people around him gasp and take a few steps back as they watched him take flight. He smiled down at all of them, then darted up and out through the hole in the concrete roof. Jack stood there for a moment and looked to the group of people. He smiled and nodded to them, then he gave them a quick salute before he dashed forwards, then leapt up through the hole. Jack could see Jonas hovering about 3 stories off the ground, looking down at him before he turned and took off towards the city. Jack followed after him. He quickly caught up to Jonas and jogged along below him. He made sure to trail just behind him to keep him in his field of view. The flying man dressed in Grecian attire climbed higher and higher into the air as they neared the downtown area. As they neared a skyscraper, he soared up towards the top of the building. Jack stopped at the base of the building, boots skidding a bit as the soles of them warmed and wore against the asphalt below. He looked up the many stories towards the roof and then smirked. Jack turned and jogged backwards a few blocks before he charged the building as he built towards top speed. He raced towards the wall, but as he reached it, he placed a single foot against it, then another and another. He began to climb, racing straight up the side of the tower. He could feel the change in speed as his momentum faded rapidly as he tried desperately to charge up the side of the structure. Just before he reached the top, he threw himself forwards like he was going into a dive and reached with outstretched arms for the edge of the building. Jack's fingertips caught the ledge. He pulled himself up and over the lip of the concrete wall and onto the roof. Then he turned and looked back down 70 or more stories he'd just scaled. "Impressive," said Jonas with a grin. Jack turned to face him. "So ready for story time, young man?" Jonas asked with a wide smile. He looked around the same age, if not maybe a bit younger than Jack. "Who you calling young man?" Jonas's smile widened all the more as he moved to stand by the edge of the building and looked out over it as his smile faded and he took on a more serious tone. "In the beginning?" "Nope," said Jack flatly. Jonas smirked. "A long time ago in a—" "Nuh-uh. Try again." Jonas raised an eyebrow and gave Jack a sideways glance, tearing his gaze from the Austin skyline. "All right. Once upon a time," said Jonas in a mocking tone. This time Jack fell silent and gave Jonas a look that said, "Do it one more time, asshole." Jonas laughed as a wide smile broke across his sculpted, bearded face. He sighed and moved to sit down on the edge of the roof, legs dangling off the edge. The wind whistled in their ears as Jonas began to speak once more. "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy." Jack said nothing as Jonas looked to him. So he continued, "The world and the history you know is only a half-truth. Superheroes as you know them, or gods, heroes and monsters as those before you called them, do exist. We have almost always been here, a part of your history and world. Obfuscated behind a veil of myths, legends, stories, even comic books." "How?" asked Jack. "Because people believe what they choose to believe. They will ignore the things they don't understand out of fear, mistrust, ignorance, or simply because it's easy. When something doesn't fit the world people live in, then it doesn't exist. It's not real." Jack sighed. He could see what Jonas was getting at. But why? Why not just let the world know? "Why haven't you?" countered Jonas. Jack fell silent for a moment. He knew the reasons why he hadn't. Jonas smiled, looking at Jack like he was reading a book. "You fear for those you care about. You know the world would not accept you. You know what they would try to do to you. And you know how they would treat you. A single person is generally thoughtful, willing to listen, and is capable of understanding. But a group, a mob mentality, that is a different animal altogether. We are the same, you and I. We don't get involved for fear of harming or endangering those we do care about, and we try to let man be and not get involved. Too often, it has led to horrible things in the past. War, murder, torture, and worse. Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a cellophane-wrapped cigar, then slid it from the package. He produced a Zippo from his other pocket, but a quick flash of light and heat made him blink. He opened his eyes to see his cigar lit and the glow in Jonas's hand fading. He took a few puffs and exhaled the smoke slowly as he watched the swirling plumes of smoke get whipped up and churned about by the wind before being carried off in long trailing wisps. "But where did you come from? Why are you here? Tell me everything." Jonas laughed heartily and let out a sigh. "Oh, there isn't time for that. Not yet. But I can tell you everything you need to know for now." His dark gaze shifted back out towards the Austin skyline as he slowly took in a deep breath. Our story being somewhere far from here, on a planet called Titan. Jack shot Jonas a look of surprise. "I am Prometheus, of House Iapetus, one of the ruling houses of Titanian, or once ruling. I haven't been there in many millennia." Jack was beginning to think Jonas was crazy, but he'd also seen him fly and shoot blasts of energy from his hands. He was willing to give him a chance. "My people had just begun a civil war, in their long history of wars and conquest, all in the name of the Titanian dominion. I was a member of a crew on a ship that was boarded and commandeered by uppity nobles, we'll say, rebels. They not so politely convinced me and the rest of the skeleton crew of the Olympus to leave the dock. I don't honestly blame them. They didn't want any part of the growing war, and honestly, looking back on it, neither did I, but I could see where the war would lead." The way Jonas spoke about these things and the look on his face made Jack question whether or not this guy was telling the truth. Jack was starting to believe him. "So we left. We took the ship and set sail along the stars in search of a better place to grow our society, without the constant warring, bigotry, and bloodshed. You know what they say, the grass is always greener on the other side of the bridge." "I always liked that saying," said Jonas as he derailed for a moment and grinned. "The Olympus was a prototype ship, state-of-the-art for our military. It worked by shifting the ship out of reality and into a plane of pocket space. A place of infinite energy that seemingly connected all points in the universe. Well, it did not work, not as intended anyway." Jonas's face grew serious again. "The ship jumped, stepping out of reality and into somewhere else." "What powered the ship?" interrupted Jack. "Excuse me," said Jonas with a bit of an annoyed look on his face as he was cut off mid-story. "I figure the thing didn't run on diesel and sounds like it was way past nuclear. I mean, I probably won't get it, but just curious. If you were the pilot, then you'd know about the engines and stuff." Jonas looked at Jack sternly before responding with a single word: "Magic." Jack rolled his eyes and waited for a serious response, but Jonas was still looking at him with the annoyed expression. Was he serious? "Wait, what? You're fucking with me, right?" asked Jack as his head tilted slightly in confusion. "The Nexus reactor focused strange energies we'd discovered that were connected to this alternate dimension that the ship's engines used to travel great distances. It was powered by what you humans call magic and moved through the ley lines." Jack gave Jonas a dumbfounded look as Jonas continued. "We jumped, but the ship was not finished and the engines overloaded. The ship's engine exploded, locking the Olympus within the ley lines and trapping it forever, anchoring her and changing her in some ways. The Nexus reactor, you know, the magic engine," said Jonas in a sarcastic tone as he gave Jack a funny look. "Well, it went boom, to put it simply." Jack wanted to hit him. "We were all caught up in this, of course. The energies of the dimension and the ship's reactor changed us. It enhanced our species' varied natural abilities and brought them more to the surface. We became like gods to the primitive people of the ball of rock we'd crashed on. This planet, your planet." Jack continued to puff on his cigar as he listened to the yarn the man was spinning him. "We ruled for a long time, doing both good and bad things, but power corrupts. I saw that we were turning into the very thing we'd wanted to flee, so I decided to change that." "You gave fire to man," said Jack as he cut in. Jonas looked surprised for a moment that the Soldier actually knew of the myth in some regard. "High school English," replied Jack as he took another puff from his cigar. Jonas grinned and nodded. "In a fashion. I began to recreate the accident. I gave man powers. I wasn't the only one, of course. Many of us had our own experiments, or our own children." His expression darkened once again. "Of course I was punished for what I did, but it set things in motion. Man, along with other heroes born of the age, began to rise up against the gods. Of course, my actions had reminded some why we came here, and they supported man standing on their own. Others felt differently. They believed that it was their place and their right to rule you." Jonas sighed and fell silent again for a moment. This led to more conflict, and a civil war of sorts. The very thing we'd wanted to avoid so long ago. Man was drawn into this battle, and the final fight between gods and man was fought over the nation continent of Atlantis. At this point, Jack was listening to the story like a kid watching Saturday morning cartoons as he puffed away at his cigar. Something about the way the man talked and the look in his eye was compelling, to say the least. He'd seen that look before as well, in the eyes of soldiers, in his own eyes. Other gods and entities of ages past joined in the fighting, choosing sides as this conflict had grown to affect them as well. One side sought to bring about an end of all things and to begin again, rebuild the new world from the ashes and bones of the old one. That side was led by Hades, his three generals Ares, Hel, and Loki, the horsemen of the apocalypse. The other side was led by council made up of the greatest heroes and gods of the era. Myself, of course, along with others like Hercules, Poseidon, Hephaestus, and of course Zeus. Jonas reached under his armored skirt and pulled out a worn leather hip flask that he raised up to his lips and took a sip from before holding it out to Jack. Jack looked down at the flask and frowned a bit after seeing where Jonas had pulled it from. He shook his head and puffed at his cigar again as Jonas shrugged and took another sip before continuing. The war was intense, brutal, and short. It ended with Atlantis sinking into limbo and vanishing. Hundreds upon thousands of people forever just gone, locked away and trapped forever in a moment of terror and destruction outside of time and reality itself. A fate worse than death. Jonas raised his flask again and took another long, hard gulp. But man had won the war. The cost, of course, would set your people back eons in their development. With so many of the gods and old heroes dead, we were all devastated. We didn't want another one of our family to die. So Zeus and a few others imprisoned Hades, using the aid of the elementals to trap him in a cage he couldn't escape. Jonas sighed, signifying that he was beginning to approach the end of his story. From there, the council we'd created met and chose to safeguard mankind, both from us, from the things in the world that still wanted to see a return to the old ways, and also from themselves, to guide them through the darkness like a compass as they find their own path. Our stories became myths and legends. We decided to withdraw from our interactions with humanity, limiting ourselves and our interactions with you, to our own determent and yours as well. Myths and legends turned to rumors and comics, and the world forgot. Some of us remember, and there are things happening. Forces are being rallied and created. Those people weren't being enslaved, Jack. They were being drafted into the coming war. I know it's coming. I can see it. Jack didn't like the way Jonas was talking now. It was far too believable, but he didn't want to believe it. But Jonas pressed on. You know it. It's why you're here. Jonas put the cap back on his flask and tucked it away once more into a pocket sewn into the waistband of his skirt, under the leather straps. You could see the change happening, the war spreading. And you chose to fight, even when you had so little to fight for and almost nothing left to give. You fought. You didn't know what you were fighting, but you knew it was wrong, and you fought all the same. You saw the man back there, the one you fought. Ballistic? Said Jack. Jonas nodded. That's what would have happened to those people. Or worse, that's Luca's plan, or Loki, should I say. He's recruiting, building an army. No one builds an army without planning to go to war one day. The war is coming, Jack. It's why I need a Soldier. I need someone to lead the army we are going to build to fight back against Loki and his apocalyptic acolytes. We? I haven't agreed to anything yet. I'm a civilian now, not a soldier, said Jack as he tossed the butt of his cigar off of the roof down to the street below that was dotted here and there with the headlights of cars, streetlights, and signs. The faintly lit cherry of the cigar faded into the darkness below before there was a brief spark as it hit the pavement and scattered ashes and embers about. That's not what the symbol on your chest says. It says you're a soldier, said Jonas as he pointed to the sergeant major insignia on Jack's vest. Jack clenched his teeth for a moment. Not saying I believe this crazy-ass shit, but why not just lead the army yourself? Jonas grinned. You're starting to believe. And that's enough for now. To answer your question, it's because the world doesn't need a return to the old gods. What it needs are new heroes. That's why I want you to lead, to guide the world into a new age of heroes, to bring them hope like you did for those people tonight. Jack stayed silent for a moment and sighed as he crossed his arms over his chest and thought. He didn't like that this made sense in some strange way. Just come with me. Let me show you, said Jonas. Jack stood there for a moment in silent contemplation. He didn't know if he believed this guy's story or not, but something about it certainly seemed true, and it was the only thing he'd been told that had made any sort of sense after waking up miraculously healed in the hospital. The world needs heroes, said Jonas. Jack looked up, his head cocked to the side. That phrase, for some reason, it sounded all too familiar to him. Finally, Jack nodded. Fine, give me a few days. How do I contact you? Jonas grinned. Don't worry, I know how to find you. I'll be in touch tomorrow, he said before grinning and taking off silently into the night sky, leaving Jack standing alone on the rooftop as Prometheus vanished in the darkness above. James E. Thomas. Chapter 12. Should I stay or should I go? Jack turned to leave. He slowly approached the edge of the building, then stopped and looked down over the ledge. The ground was far, far below. It was something he hadn't truly considered until now. He shrugged and turned to approach the roof access door to the building and grasped the knob and turning. It was locked. Shit. Jack raised his hand up and scratched at his neck before thinking. His gaze moved back over to the edge of the roof. There wasn't enough roof to gain speed to try and run down the side, if that would even work. He wasn't a physicist and had no idea what speeds or things were needed to try and run down a building, except maybe some rappelling gear. But he didn't have that on him. Getting up here hadn't been too much of a problem. Getting down, well, not so much. Jack suddenly felt like a cat stuck up a tree and couldn't help but grin and chuckle to himself as he moved over to the edge of the building once more and looked down. Well, shit. He stopped and glanced about. The next closest building was too far away and the roof was far below this one. He wasn't sure if he could make the jump, let alone survive the fall if he made it, or worse, if he missed. Jack looked back over to the door. He could just kick it in or rip it off the hinges. Probably. The problem was he'd be damaging private property. He knew the company could afford it, but still it was the wrong thing to do. His gaze moved about and he spotted a camera just above the door. He'd got himself up here, he had to get himself down. Great, they got me on camera too. Triple shit. So either they got me kicking in a door, or they got me trapped up here until someone lets me out, or the cops show up to arrest me for trespassing. Jack's gaze moved back over to the next closest skyscraper. It was far, a full city block or more between the two buildings. He had 150, maybe 200 feet of running rooming up here. He approached the edge and looked down and over. He'd had jump training, but the problem was he didn't have a chute. He knew he could jump up to the top of a 3-story, but this was different. He didn't know how to calculate falling or horizontal leap distance and all that crap off the top of his head. He sighed and shrugged before backing up to the opposite edge of the building. Then he charged. Wind whipped in his ears as he sped across the top of the roof and approached the ledge. Then he leapt and hurled himself off the edge of the roof. He soared over the top of a parking garage below, clearing distance rapidly. The roof was coming up quick, but he had already begun to fall quickly and loose, both speed and distance. This was going to be close. Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. Jack cleared the edge of the roof, barely. He made it past the ledge 10 feet or so. What he wasn't ready for was the landing. He tried to catch himself on his feet, but was unable to fully stick his landing. He tucked, fell forwards, and went into a somewhat controlled roll thanks to his combat jump experience. Jack hit the concrete roof hard and skipped, bouncing off the gravel as he rolled and spun. He hit again, bouncing a second, third, fourth, and fifth time as he tumbled across the gravelled roof. He spun and skidded, and as he did, he could hear the Kevlar vest and the fabric of his fatigues shredding. A shoe went flying off his foot as the laces broke, spiraling off the top of the building, tongue flapping about wildly before plummeting downward. He sprawled out and clawed at the ground as he skidded to a stop only 40 or so feet from the opposite edge of the roof. Jack laid there for a moment before rolling over. His clothes were torn and tattered across parts of his torso, hanging from him limply, and the bottoms of his pants and the knees were shredded completely. He was also pretty sure at some point he'd torn the arse out of his pants. Ow! He slowly sat up with a grunt to survey the damage. Well, if I can sit up, it ain't that bad. Jack's body ached all over, and he could see light road rash along his knees, elbows, shoulders, and could feel it on his jaw. Thankfully, it wasn't anything major, which was surprising as hell to him. He stood up slowly and looked about for his boot as he brushed gravel and dust from his road rash. But no luck. Fuck. Jack stood there for a moment and could help but grin and laugh at the situation. Like old Will Rogers always said, you gotta be able to laugh at yourself. He just shook his head and looked over towards the next skyscraper. It looked to be about the same distance, maybe a bit shorter, and it wasn't as great of a fall. Jack took in a deep breath and moved over to the opposite edge once more, then sped forward and leapt out once more over nothing but air. He sailed through the night and over the edge of the next building before he landed the ground, going into a much more controlled roll this time. It still hurt. He managed to come up in a crouch, then stood. Man, this looks a hell of a lot easier in those Spider-Man movies and stuff. After the next few leaps, he began to get a better hang of things. It still wasn't easy, and he could definitely use some more practice at this. He finally made it to the ground and sprinted back towards his home as fast as he could, afraid that security cameras might catch a glimpse of a half-naked, bare-ass superhero running down the street. After only a few minutes, he made it home and jumped in through the bathroom window, thankful to be someplace out of public. Once inside, Jack stripped out of the tattered rags, then climbed in the shower to get cleaned up. Afterwards, he stood in the bathroom for a moment and surveyed the scraps of cloth that used to be his fatigues and vest. He sighed and chucked them into a trash bag. Then he headed down and tossed them in the dumpster outside. Jack could hear Mr. Tran snoring away as an infomercial played loudly on the TV. He grinned and headed upstairs, deciding it best to head to bed himself. Jack woke up that morning around 7 a.m. and hopped into the shower after he'd started up a pot of coffee. He'd noticed that he felt a lot better in the mornings than he used to. He didn't really need the coffee to help wake up anymore, it was just part of the habit. The heat of the shower helped ease what pain still remained in his hip. Even after all of this, some of the pain persisted as a constant lingering reminder. He figured it was probably due to nerve damage that didn't heal, despite whatever it was they injected him with. The scrapes and bruises from the previous night were completely gone, but he still felt a little stiff. Jack got dressed and grabbed some coffee just before there was a knock at his door. He moved over and opened the door to find a group of 3 men standing there. One was older, with heavily greyed hair and a bristly mustache, and he was dressed in a paint-stained red shirt with a pocket on the left breast. The second man was younger, in his 30s, with curly red hair beginning to grey, and he wore a tank top and button-up plaid shirt with the sleeves rolled up, along with worn jeans. And the third was the youngest, probably in his late teens, sandy blonde hair that was shaved short, and he was dressed in a brown Legend of Zelda t-shirt with several holes in it. "Here to repair a bathroom," said the oldest of the 3. "Oh yeah, come on in, guys." "Just over there," said Jack as he pointed towards the bathroom, not too far from the entryway. "I just made a fresh pot. You'll want any?" asked Jack as he headed back into the kitchen. He pulled out a few Jimmy Dean breakfast sandwiches from the half-full box and opened one end before tossing them in the microwave to nuke. "Yeah, I'll take a cup if you don't mind," said the older man, The other two just shook their heads as each held up a can of energy drink and headed into the bathroom after oldest. Jack poured an extra cup and headed into the bathroom to deliver it, handing it off. "Damn, do you shoot up your bathroom or something?" asked the old man as he took the cup of coffee. "Thanks. No problem. And nah, some real shitheads in the alley out there did it. But I returned the favor," added Jack with a smile. The old man and the other two grinned a bit as they get to work. "Oh yeah, I heard about that on the news, I think. Sad business, but good on you. I heard some other fella wasn't as lucky, got all shot up and put in the hospital." Jack nodded. "Yeah, I heard that too." Jonas was right. People just didn't believe or know, even when the truth was staring them in the face. He wondered how far that extended, how many myths, legends, and others things might be true. "Welp, we're going to get to it. Should be done around the afternoon, I think," said the old man. Jack nodded. "All right, well, help yourself to the coffee. Thanks, y'all." "Appreciate it," the old man said, as with a raise of his steaming cup before he took a sip. Jack headed back out into the kitchen as he heard the beeping of his microwave. He retrieved his breakfast and tossed it on a plate before moving back out into the living room and plopping down onto the couch. Jack clicked on the TV and turned over to the news only to be greeted with a story of his exploits from last night. He sat there grinning and eating his sausage and egg sandwich as the news anchor carried on about the mass number of kidnapping and human trafficking victims the police had uncovered. Along with a concealed train switch yard from the 1940s, interviews with witnesses claimed that they were rescued by two men. One man was dressed in military-style fatigues and combat gear, bearing the insignia of a sergeant major on his chest. Witnesses claimed the second man was wielding a spear and was dressed as a Greek or Roman soldier. Police refuse to give any other details at the moment, but many are stating this is further proof that Austin has its very own superhero. These accounts are corroborated by cameras from several businesses around town that managed to catch sight of Austin's mysterious superhero as he leaped from roof to roof in a single bound. Whether a highly elaborate hoax by an unknown charlatan, a citizen turned vigilante, or a real-life superhero, many, including this journalist, feel a little safer at night with Austin's streets being patrolled by this unnamed sergeant major. In related news, federal funding for annual Border Patrol budget has been cut, leading to a reduced number of agents patrolling the Texas-Mexico border. Many blame the uptick in... Jack listened to the report as he finished up his breakfast. Most of it was discussion of crimes in the city, state border patrol, human trafficking, organized crime, and vigilantism. Around 9, his phone began to ring, and he moved into the bedroom to grab it from the charger. It was Cassie. "Hey, what's up, short stuff?" There was a disgruntled sigh. Not much jerk face. "Hey, I wanted to ask you something. Can we meet up around lunch at Walla Beach?" "Yeah, sure. What's up?" "Nothing, I'll tell you when I see ya. Love your Uncle Jack." "Love you too." Cassie hung up and Jack pocketed his phone. Yeah, something was up. He sat down at his computer and began to do a search on surplus military fatigues and equipment. It looked like he'd be going through a lot of the stuff, and as it was, he was already out. He found some after doing some searching and began to compare costs, figure out how much he might need, and at the end of it all he was left a bit shocked at the cost. He wondered just how much equipment he might need and how he was going to be able to afford it all. But if this was a war, then Jonas had to have some kind of backer, right? Soon enough it was nearing lunchtime and Jack climbed into his Jeep. He figured it was probably faster to just run there, but he didn't want to destroy any more shoes or risk being seen out in the open. Besides, he liked to drive. So he headed down and climbed in, then took off out of the parking lot. After about a 15-minute drive due to lunchtime traffic, he finally found a spot, parked, and got out. He could see Cassie's car parked not far off. One of those new VW Bugs with the lashes on the headlights, and it was a sparkly, dark purple. He rolled his eyes and shook a head as he saw the car again. He didn't care much for the new models of VWs. That ain't a bug. "Uncle Jack, over here, and stop giving my car the stank eye," called out Cassie. She was seated under the shade of a gazebo not too far off and appeared to have a few brown paper bags that were so soaked through with grease you could almost see through them. Downtown burgers. His mouth began to water at the thought. He waved to her and moved over before taking a seat at the picnic table beside her. "What's up?" Cassie sat and stared off for a moment as she smiled at him, thinking of what to say, what to ask. She decided to go for a frontal assault. Shock and awe tactics. "Are you a superhero?" she said, as she held out one of the greasy bags to Jack. Jack was reaching out to take it when she asked her question and fumbled the bag, barely catching it before it hit the table. He just stared at her for a moment and grinned as he scoffed and shrugged while looking away. "Look, I'm not stupid and you're crap at lying, and pretty uncreative too. Let's see. You miraculously got better after being caught up in a drive-by. Check. You got ripped and got taller. Check. You're a soldier who just got back home from war and has a hard time letting it go. Check. And you were a sergeant in the army and your freaking last name is Majors. Check. I mean, come on. Sergeant Major? Seriously? That was the best you could come up with?" Jack sat there awkwardly and reached into the bag, then pulled out the grease-soaked paper-wrapped burger and unwrapped it slowly. He looked about, making sure nobody was paying any attention. Thankfully, the park was mostly empty, save for a few midday joggers, walkers, and a few people on their lunch breaks. "Fair enough. I thought it was kinda clever." Cassie went wide-eyed a bit and shot him a sidelong look. She glanced about as she held onto her bag and rolled her eyes. "It's corny." Jack grinned and took a bite of his burger and chewed the greasy, savory, succulent treat. "And you can't just give yourself a promotion. But yeah, play on words, I get it. Still, obvious as hell." "Did you seriously name yourself that?" said Cassie. Jack shrugged. "I mean, not really. Like I said, just thought I kinda deserved a promotion and it was kinda funny. They called me that. I never said that was my name or anything." "Okay, Cap," said Cassie with a shake of her head before she pulled out her fries and burger. Jack sighed. "Okay, so you know, now what?" Cassie took a bite of her burger, but ignored his question. Instead, she asked her own around a mouthful of bacon cheeseburger. "So was it Dad? Is that why you needed to talk to him?" Jack shrugged again. "I don't know. I think so. Maybe? I'm not sure. It's why I need to talk to him." Cassie nodded as she picked up a fry. "So who's the other guy, your sidekick?" Jack laughed. "I don't know that either. Says his name is Prometheus, or Jonas. Weird guy. Told me some stuff that I don't know if I believe yet. But it makes some kind of sense, and I have a feeling he knows more than he lets on." Cassie took a bite of the fry. "Cool, so that means I get to be your sidekick then." Jack nearly choked on his burger, but managed to swallow it as he looked to her. Cassie's grin nearly stretched from ear to ear, but he could tell she meant it. "Nah. Cassie nodded. "Uh-huh." Jack shook his head. "Nope, I ain't putting you in danger like that, and beside you got school." Cassie rolled her eyes. "Bah, so I take some time off. Be a superhero for a bit. Or, I mean, at least I can help you with figuring stuff out, targeting the bad guys, that kind of stuff. And I know how to fight and shoot." Jack laughed. "Your dad would fucking kill me. Straight up send a spec ops team. And no, I know you can take care of yourself, but you ain't a soldier." "Yet," Cassie interjected. Jack sighed. "Okay, yeah. Yet. Finish college, become an officer, and we'll talk. Maybe. And besides, I'm not sure I'll be around here much longer. Gonna go figure some stuff out, I guess." "With this Prometheus dude? Sounds weird. Didn't know you were into guys," teased Cassie. Jack shot her a glare. "Don't make me whoop your ass like your daddy should have." Cassie laughed. "Please, like you could." Jack stared at Cassie a second, then let out a light chuckle. "Haha, nah. Like I said, I think he knows more than he lets on. And he said something's coming, and I'm afraid he might be right. Either way, it's worth checking out. Either he's crazy and has powers, or he's right, which might be worse. Wait, he has powers too." "Okay, I'm totally coming now," said Cassie, then took another bite of her sandwich. No, you aren't." Cassie laughed. "Look, I'm dropping out either way. Either I go try to become my own hero, or I become your sidekick, your choice, old man. Am I coming with or not? This is on you either way," she mumbled around a mouthful of food. Jack sighed and took a big bite of his burger and slowly chewed on it like it was cud. A grimace spread across his face as he stared off at the Colorado River not too far away. He stayed silent until he'd finished the bite. Fuck, in for a penny, in for a pound. Cassie squealed with delight and threw her arms around his shoulders in a big hug. Yes, thank you, Unc. You won't regret it, I promise. Too late, he said flatly. James E. Thomas. Chapter 13, Sharp-Dressed Man. After lunch, Jack headed back to his apartment with Cassie following behind him. He pulled in and headed upstairs with Cassie keeping at his heels, but staying quiet. Her mind was racing with questions she wanted to ask him. Jack was more worried on how to convince Cassie not to ruin her life, let alone put it in danger. He was supposed to protect her, and he was damned if he was going to let her throw her life away, or worse, get herself killed. The door to Mr. Tran's office was open as Jack passed by. Seeing the old man look up from the TV just long enough to give Jack and Cassie a courteous nod, then his gaze shifted back to the dull glow pouring from the TV. Jack climbed the stairs towards his apartment and headed inside. A head emerged from his bathroom, which threw Jack off for a second as he was so lost in thought. Hey, almost all done in here. Just finishing up with the grout. I'd say let it dry a good 4 hours or so before taking a shower or anything. It's fast setting, but it'd be better to let it sit 8 hours, I'd say, just to be safe, said the older man. Jack smiled and nodded. Oh yeah, thanks, he said as he moved over and popped his head into the bathroom to check it out. The mirror had been replaced, along with the broken and shattered tiles that once barely clung to the walls. In their place were brand new baby blue tiles. Jack wondered how the hell they still got tile in that color. It looked like it was something from the early 70s. Who's this? Said the older man as he spotted Cassie coming in through the door behind Jack. Oh, that's my goddaughter Cassie, said Jack. Gee, thanks, Uncle Asshole. Hi, I'm Cassandra. Nice to meet you, she said with a smile. The older man laughed lightly and nodded to her as she moved forwards and extended a hand, which he took and shook. He released her firm handshake and looked back over his shoulder. You two about finished up in there? Yeah, just finished up, said one of the two boys before they headed out of the bathroom, the older one carrying a large red toolbox, and the other carrying a 5-gallon bucket filled with various tools, garbage, and scraps. The sandy blonde-haired helper stopped and eyed Cassie for a moment as his eyes widened a bit and he tried not to check her out. Cassie spotted his roaming gaze and turned to look at him with a smile as she raised a single eyebrow at him. He immediately flushed a bit and turned away before heading towards the front door, followed by the older red-headed helper. Be down in the truck, Dad, he called out as his older brother just grinned and gave him a light shove from behind. Cassie rolled her eyes and moved over into the kitchen as Jack finished up with the elder worker. Hey, thanks for fixing that up again, Jack said as he extended a hand to the man. Yeah, no problem. Just don't go getting shot at anymore, said the older gentleman as he shook Jack's hand, then headed out. Jack walked with him, opening the door for him, but as he did, he was met with a finely dressed gentleman standing on the other side of his front door. His long, dark, curly hair was drawn back into a ponytail and his beard was well groomed. His amber eyes looked back at Jack from behind his thick eyebrows, the edges of them wrinkling as a grin spread across his face. He was dressed in a finely tailored suit that was a deep amber and wore a bright yellow shirt to complement the outfit along with polished leather shoes, but no tie. A pair of identical polished gold cufflinks emblazed with a compass rose completed the immaculate outfit. It was Prometheus or Jonas. Jack still wasn't sure which to call him. Well, Jack prompt as ever, that's good, he said as he strolled inside, past Jack and the repairman. The older worker watched as the man entered Jack's apartment, then looked back to Jack. Well, looks like you got guests. You have a good one, he said before turning and heading down the stairs slowly. Jack closed the door and locked it behind him before turning around and moving back towards the living room and kitchen. He could already hear Jonas talking to Cassie. And you must be Cassandra Barrett. It is a pleasure to meet you. You know you could have called or said you were coming over, said Jack in a bit of a disgruntled fashion as he stepped into the living room. Jonas stopped and turned to face him. I did tell you, last night if you remember correctly. You can't blame me for your own lapses of memory. Yeah, but still, phones, they're a thing, you know. And you could have given me a lift down from the roof last night too. Running down a building ain't like running up one. Jonas just grinned. I can't be blamed for your indiscretions either. Still, you're here and you managed. Is this him? Asked Cassie. Jack nodded. Wow, I expected something else. Not so much suit and pompous attitude, she said, as her dark eyes ran over him slowly as she inspected him. Jack just grinned. And how do you know my name, anyways? Cassie raised an eyebrow at Jonas inquisitively. Jonas smiled as he moved over and was about to take a seat on the couch, then looked down at it and decided against it. His gaze shifted back over to Jack and Cassie as he stood in Jack's living room. As I was saying, my name is Prometheus, but for the sake of secrecy and simplicity, you may just call me Mr. Pratt, or Jonas, if you prefer, my dear. And as to how I know your name, well, that's simple. I work with your father. Cassie gave Jonas a strange look, but Jack took it all in stride. His gaze fell back down to Jonas's cufflinks as his mind drew back to the hospital room, Steve's visit. He'd seen that symbol before. It was a common enough symbol, but not in the way it was portrayed on the cufflinks. It was stylized, but also somewhat simplistic, and boldly set into the metal, a clear insignia of some kind. What's the symbol? Said Jack flatly as he pointed to the cufflinks and moved into the kitchen, pulling out a beer. Oh, this. It's the crest of the Meridian Order. And that is? Asked Cassie. It's where I work with your father. Cassie just blinked, like that meant nothing, as Jack cracked open the beer and waited for more of an explanation. Awkward silence lingered in the air for a moment before Jack spoke. Okay, so that's like what? Military spec ops, secret government agency. What? Jonas grinned. Something like that, but not directly associated with any government or military. We're above that. Jack sighed as Cassie just rolled her eyes. You ain't above the government. That's just bullshit, said Jack. It was Jonas's turn to look exasperated. I would rather explain all of this only once, and we have other recruits we'll need for this war. I expect Cassie is joining us. Jack shook his head, but Cassie nodded. Yup. Jack let out a sigh and took a long gulp of his beer. Wonderful. Oh, by the way, that won't do anything for you anymore, said Jonas as he pointed to the beer, making Jack growl softly before setting down the beer. The relaxing buzz he usually got from drinking a few beers had evaded him the several few times he'd cracked open some cold ones. He'd wondered about that before, but now it seemed he had his confirmation. What other recruits? Jack shot out. Jonas was already walking towards the front door. I'll come back by tomorrow morning. Be ready to head out. Since I don't have a car here, we can take yours. Jack was tired of this shit and zipped off down the hallway, blocking Jonas's exit. What other recruits? He said slowly and clearly, enunciating each word. Jonas stopped and looked Jack square in the eyes for a moment before a smile slipped across his face. Other heroes I've been watching that will help us. One who may even be able to give you some proper protection. You know, something that won't get torn up every time you leap tall buildings in a single bound. Jonas used the back of his hand and gently pushed Jack aside, who decided to let him pass as he opened the door. This is a war, Jack, and wars need soldiers. You didn't think you were the only one, did you? He said as he stepped out into the stairwell and closed the door behind him. James E. Thomas. Chapter 14. Better, Faster, Stronger. Work it, make it. Do it makes us. Harder, better, faster, stronger. Work it harder, make it better. Do it faster, makes us stronger. The robotic-like, synthesized voice blared loudly from the speakers in the armored tactical vehicle as Val bobbed his head in time with the bass-heavy techno beat of the song. His fiery crimson thin dreadlocks that dangled down about his shoulders bounced in time with the bobbing of his head. Not too unlike the cherry Twizzler that hung from his lips as he chewed on it idly. His thick, wild mane of crimson dreads hung about his cleanly shaved, almond-shaped face. The pale LED lighting inside of the vehicle's spacious covered bed made his freckle-dotted ivory skin look pasty underneath it. The intense lights reflected off of the magnification goggles he was wearing, which made his deep green eyes look comically large as he sauntered away at a crown-like headset lined with sensors and diodes along the interior. Val was young, only 22, and several years into college. An olive-green t-shirt with the silhouette of Bob Marley on the front, and the words "Don't worry about a thing" printed in black, red, and yellow lettering hung loosely from his broad shoulders, pudgy chest, and husky frame. Tattered and baggy blue jeans hung around his long, thick legs, and a brown hemp belt kept his pants cinched tightly around his middle and under his slight love handles. A pair of brown leather flip-flops with rainbow-patterned straps adorned his feet as he tapped against the rubber mat-covered floor in time with the beat. His baggy outfit made his gangly 6-foot-tall frame look all the lankier. The interior of the ATV was sleek and cutting-edge. Banks of monitors lined the polished metal walls of the massive armored truck. Each was linked up to a customized computer system installed into the van that was funded by the Department of Homeland Security. Cooling systems ran throughout the interior of the van to aid in cooling the advanced computer systems that were designed for logistical support of DHS or law enforcement officers in the field. The primary purpose of the advanced system was to function as a mobile anti-computer terrorism unit, in addition to aiding officers in the field with shared communications, dispatching, technical information, and more. A vast array of equipment for forensic analysis, like a miniaturized mass spectrometer, had been built into the ATV. The secondary purpose of this beast was riot suppression and crowd control. The ATV was loaded out with a number of less-than-lethal weapon systems and countermeasures. The weapon systems included ablative armor similar to what was on the M1 Abrams tank, a sonic cannon, microwave guns, and banks of claymore-like tasers lining the sides of the vehicle. When activated, the tasers emitted a series of lasers, which of course did no damage, but did ionize the air enough to carry a powerful electrical charge for up to about 10 meters. This allowed for one hell of an electrical shock that was enough to drop even people in body armor. With so many power consumption requirements, the ATV had to be powered by an experimental nuclear reactor, which was slightly smaller than briefcase and bolted to the back wall with 2 backup electric cells that the size of 2 home water heaters placed side by side. However, for Val, the cherry on top of this high-tech ice cream sundae was its interface. The ATV was meant to be piloted and controlled from the cockpit, without need for manual controls, all via a headset. It was all theoretical up until now, though preliminary testing with traditional neural stimulus methods had been promising. The pilot would simply wear the control crown and think about what direction they wanted the vehicle to move in, at what speed, or which systems they wanted to activate. This included the vehicle's high-speed satellite communications uplink, cloud access, and remote access to DHS, DoD, NSA, and other law enforcement databases. The sprinkles on top were the augmented reality projection systems hooked up and synced with the bulletproof touchscreen windows and windshield installed into the ATV. The thing was practically the Batmobile, all paid for with taxpayer money, funded by the federal government and built in the good old USA by some of the brightest minds UC Berkeley and several investing companies had to offer. Federal grant money usually came in the form of such programs. The government gives a university some money, and in return, they collaborate on a project that interests the government. In this case, it was the military. That was how Val had ended up working on this technological wet dream. Being a graduate student of UC Berkeley's electrical, mechanical, and computer engineering programs, along with their computer programming school, made Val a sure-in for one of the coveted positions assigned to the experimental ATV. Val was child prodigy that had graduated from high school when he was only 15, before receiving a full ride to Berkeley. Being young, a nerd, and hyperactive led to Val making few friends, and his intellect had only further separated him from the rest of his peers. Add all of that to the fact that Val's mom had ended up on RateMyProfessor.com's top 10 list of hottest professors for the last 2 years, and his social life was fairly non-existent. That was, of course, if you didn't include his pot dealer Noah that lived a few dorm rooms down. The animosity from others and Val's loneliness only ever served to further drive his ambitions. He did it either to prove himself worthy of their respect or adoration, or at the very least, prove that he was better than them. Being an only child and raised by a single mother, Val had been left to his own devices during childhood. He'd spent most of his time online in chat rooms, behind a console playing video games, or figuring out how various things in the house worked. Cell phones, TVs, radios, the microwave, even the AC unit one time. He'd always connected with cell phones, tablets, and desktops, or Master Chief, Cloud Strife, or Link more than he'd ever connected with most real people. Besides his mom, that was. Val never knew his dad, and his mom never really mentioned him. Of course, his mom would bring up how proud his dad would be of him, or how much like his father he was, but Val always resented the man for not being around, no matter what his mother had said. Even so, a part of him deeply wished he knew his father, and he often wondered what happened to him, and why his mom didn't talk about him. Val's mom did the best she could for him. She was a medical professor at Stanford University and had been a bit disappointed in him when he chose to go to Berkeley instead. However, being a professor at a medical college left her with very little time for him. He'd been a latchkey kid his entire childhood. Of course, he'd wanted for nothing, and his mom doted on him as often as she could. When he was younger, she'd even brought him to the university with him, allowing him to sit in on her lectures and walk around with her on rounds. That was until he tried to take apart defibrillator one day. It was daycare after that, then elementary school, middle school, and high school for a few years, and after that he'd moved into the dorms. Though he loved his mother and knew what she'd done for him, he still resented all of the times in his life she hadn't been there. Val set down the spool of silver soldering wire on the table and placed the soldering iron on its stand beside it. The light hiss of steam escaped the wetted sponge as the hot metal tip of the soldering iron made contact with it. He began to visually double-check all of his work on the circuitry for the bypass he'd installed into the control crown. Each connection to one of the electrodes was solid and would carry a current along the diode to the processor. He still had no idea how the processor really worked, or who built it for that matter, probably one of the companies involved with the project. The processor for the control crown was about 3 inches long, 1.5 inches wide, and only a few centimeters thick. It was also somewhat malleable, but was heavy like lead. It wasn't like putty or anything, more like a hard memory foam that would slowly move as touched. However, it felt solid and wouldn't squish between the fingers, mostly maintaining its shape. The processor was almost a chromed gunmetal in color and completely smooth except for a series of raised ridges that ran along the underside of it. It was also warm to the touch. Several of the team had joked about it being alien tech from Area 51. What Val and the other members of the team had been told about it was that it was a highly durable and experimental solid-state processor being tested for applications in the field, and that it couldn't be replaced. Val and the rest of the team had only done simulated or partial tests of the system without fully powering it up, for fear of ruining it and losing funding. All of the readings from initial tests had been problematic. Every controlled systems test, or the times they'd actually worn it, failed to produce a result. The processor had functioned but was always unresponsive. The issue had been debated: power, faulty hardware, and other possibilities. Val thought the answer was simple. It was an error in translation. Instead of trying to make the machine not act like a machine, simply make the pilot a part of the machine while they were wearing the helmet. Essentially making the pilot part of the circuitry for the vehicle, its hard drive and motherboard in a way. Essentially slaving the driver to the processor. After all, the human brain was the most advanced computer on the planet. So being able to process an ATV, no matter how advanced, would be nothing a person couldn't handle. There was some debate over it, but with Val being a star pupil of the university and a child prodigy, the professors overseeing the students' interaction with the project decided to go with Val's idea, much to the chagrin of his peers. Val spun around 180 degrees in his swivel chair to face one of the screens and began to type away at a keyboard set in front of it, starting up what he hoped would be the final diagnostic test for the control crown. As the test began, he dictated the closing paragraph of dissertation to one of the nearby computers. By networking the neural diode to the processor provided by the DHS and syncing them in a continuous asymmetric link, there is an increase in reaction time between pilot and the ATV. This will allow for instantaneous response time, effectively linking the pilot's nervous system with the communication systems, defenses, controls, and other electronically controlled systems for the ATV. The implications for such a linkage between man and machine are vast and will serve to be a critical and priceless technological step forwards for mankind. Val finished as he spun to face the recording terminal. He visually scanned the document quickly for errors before saving it to his portable hard drive he'd plugged into the ATV, then submitted it via email to his professor for review. With that final bit of work out of the way, he smiled and stood, then glanced over to the terminal of exterior's cameras for the ATV. It all looked clear. Val moved to the side door and opened it before looking around. "Hello?" he called out before waiting a few seconds. "Anybody else working late? I was thinking about a coffee break," he said, then waited once more. A sly grin spread across his face as he ducked back into the ATV. He sealed and locked the door behind him, then collapsed into the driver's seat. He reached into the pockets of his jeans and pulled out a cylindrical, polished metal tube that was sealed on both ends. He removed the magnetic cap from one end and produced a colorful glass pipe from within the tube before capping it off once more. He unscrewed the other end, opened the concealed grinder, then grasped a few fingerfuls of the pungent, finely ground, vibrantly green flower inside. Swiftly, he packed the bowl very full of the aromatic marijuana and set the glass piece down on the dashboard. Val screwed the cap back onto the grinder and pocketed the metallic carrying case, only to pull a red Bic lighter from his pocket. Val picked up the pipe and struck it, igniting the warm, orange-yellow flame as he raised the pipe to his lips. The heady scent and herbal taste of weed filled his mouth and lungs as the world grew a bit hazy. He held in the large toke for a moment, then slowly exhaled. A roiling cloud of smoke billowed out from Val's mouth and crashed against the windshield that displayed the various status of the ATV. The smoke rolled across the translucent surface as the powerful smell of weed filled the interior of the vehicle. Val let out a content sigh of relief as his brain had a chance to slow finally, and he felt his stress and ever-present anxiety begin to fade. He sparked the lighter, raised the pipe to his lips, lit it, and inhaled once more, then let out another plume of smoke with a grin. The irony of smoking pot in some high-tech government vehicle designed to be used by law enforcement wasn't lost on him. He took in another long, deep hit. The cherry-red embers in the bowl of the pipe burned brightly for a few seconds as he inhaled the thick smoke. He lowered the pipe and held in the weed with a strained look on his face before looking to a red, flashing indicator on the windshield. Detecting unrecognized subjects approaching vehicle. Warning, criminal record found, wanted perpetrator detected. "What the fuck?" he said as he leaned forwards against the console and set down the pipe and lighter. What followed was a picture of a rather stern-looking, imposing man with olive skin, a thick handlebar mustache, and long black hair that fell down around his shoulders. A serial number was displayed below the name, along with a scrolling list of various legal code violations. Val didn't know what any of the serial codes meant, but there were a lot of them. "What the fuck?" he said as panic began to set in and his bloodshot emerald eyes widened. There was a sudden, hard tug on the door that made the metal groan slightly and caused the entire ATV to rock. Warnings began to go off, and views of the cameras immediately overlaid across the windshield. He could see the man standing at the door to the vehicle, muscles straining beneath his black tank top as he yanked at the door again. Behind him stood 4 men in completely black combat gear, carrying automatic rifles. The entire ATV rocked again as the door strained, but the magnetic locks held. Val jumped up and ran into the back of the ATV as it rocked once more. Val staggered and slammed his head into the metal wall, gashing his forehead open. He could feel warm blood beginning to run down the side of his face. "This is impossible. This is fucking impossible. I smoked some bad shit. Yeah, my shit was laced. Probably the team just fucking with me. Fuck." The entire van rocked again, and Val fell onto the rubber-matted floor. "I was wrong. Oh fuck." The sound of automatic gunfire began to echo into the interior of the ATV, along with the ineffective, soft thunk-thunk-thunk of the rounds impacting the armored and reinforced door. Val's eye darted over to the control crown laying on the floor in front of him, only a few feet away, where it had fallen off of the counter. He scrambled across the floor and snatched up the metal circlet lined with circuitry and thin padding. Val pushed himself up to his feet with the control crown grasped tightly in his hand, spun around and rushed back up to the cockpit of the ATV. Val stopped as he saw the imposing, tank-top-clad Latino man standing in front of the ATV. His cold, dark, shark-like gaze set on Val as he held his expressionless demeanor. Ballistic raised both of his muscular arms towards the ATV. Val watched with a horrified look on his face as skin, muscle, and bone warped, stretched, and reformed into the barrel of two light machine guns. Oh shit! Val ducked below the dashboard as the heavy, successive rattle of machine gun fire broke out. The rounds impacted against the armored windows and skipped off, scratching and scuffing the transparent surface with white scars. Val shook with fear as he grasped the control crown in one hand and grabbed the telephone wire-like, coiled cord that dangled from the pilot's seat in the other. Come on, work, you piece of shit, he screamed as he rocked back and forth in the fetal position on the floor. Val jammed the plug for the cord into the jack placed at the back of the control crown. A series of small blue lights illuminated along the side of the crown, and a green light came on, signifying that the connection was stable. Yes, come on, please work, he shouted as he rocked in place before jamming the control crown down onto his head. There was a sudden sharp pain that split his as the metal bands of the crown pressed down painfully tight to his dreads. Searing pain shot through him, and his vision went white as he felt something spearing through the base of his skull where the processor rested. Ah, fuck, my head. What's happening? Where are we? How did we come to be? What in hell is this place? Why did we begin referring to ourselves in third person? Wow, regular bunch of philosophers we got here. When did there get to be so many of us? We've got to stop him. Too many voices to count all began to fill and overpower Val's mind before he found himself floating in an endless sky of deep blue. Lines of white-blue light stretched out all around him, forming a framework, or outline of sorts of the ATV, the building, the electrical lines, and beyond. He could see raw information and data. He reached out and touched one of the strands making up the sketch-like outline of the ATV. What now passed as his reality warped around him, and it was like he became the ATV as his mind merged with it. He could sense all of its functions, its connections to databases, its defenses, and its weapons. More than that, he could still see himself, but it was more like controlling a character in a first-person video game. Val stood from the floor as the headlights and spotlights of the ATV came on, temporarily blinding Ballistic and making his shots go slightly astray. The engine revved as Val took a seat in the pilot's chair before he looked to the side, his eyes unseeing. Yet through the cameras and sensors of the ATV, he could clearly see the men outside shooting at the armored door. Small slats along the sides of the vehicle opened, and the hum of a capacitor charging could be heard as dozens of small crimson laser dots were projected across the chests, faces, arms, and legs of the armed and armored assailants. Val felt the energy run through his veins as bolts of electricity surged through the air along the ionized path of the harmless targeting lasers and impacted the men, sending thousands of volts of electricity coursing through them. Their bodies stiffened and seized for a moment in place before falling limply to the ground. The engine revved once more, and the Titanic armored vehicle lurched forwards and rammed directly into the machine gun-armed mercenary. Ballistic was sent flying a few feet back before tumbling across the ground. His cold eyes looked up just in time to see the ATV bearing down on him, and he instinctively tucked his arms around his head and went fetal. Bone crunched, flesh tore, and Ballistic was crushed under the weight and tires of the ATV as it roared towards the closed garage door before crashing into it and punching through the thin steel. Val kept control of the vehicle, moving it like he was simply running as he wove through the parking lot, clipping the side of an unmarked white UPS-style truck as it tried to pull out into his path. The ATV smashed in the front passenger side of the vehicle as the driver moved to level an automatic pistol at the ATV. The masked and armored driver was ejected from the vehicle as the truck was sent spinning and skidding across the pavement. Val kept his newly focused mind at the task at hand as he turned and took off down the street, trying to get to safety. Holy crap, I'm a superhero. James E. Thomas. Chapter 15, Tears in Heaven. Hank smiled as he hoisted his son, Bradley, up into the back seat of the family minivan and set him down in the car seat before clicking him as Bradley chewed on the remaining apple slices his Sunday school teacher had given him and bounced his Let's Rock Elmo on his lap while trying to sing around a mouthful of chewed apple, making a mess of his red overalls and blue and white plaid shirt his mother had dressed him in. Hank smiled and ruffled his son's hair as his wife Maggie approached. In his eyes, Maggie was more beautiful now than the day they'd met. She'd given him so much. Maggie was there for him after every tour he'd done and had taken care of their home and kids every day he'd been away during his 3 tours to the sandbox and his tour in Bosnia. She'd helped temper his anger and heal his soul whenever he returned home from war. She was the greatest blessing in his life besides their children, and to Hank, he better understood God's love through them. Maggie was shorter than him by a few inches, around 5 feet 8 inches, with lightly tanned and freckled skin from her hours spent with the kids out in the yard or gardening around the house, a favored pastime of hers. Her soft blue eyes shined gently in the bright baby blue sky above as she looked to her husband as she approached, and a light smile curled up her ochre-painted lips, lightly wrinkling the corners of her mouth. Maggie was dressed in her white silken sundress with yellow rose floral patterning across it. It was modestly cut, hanging from her shoulders and form-fitting enough to show off her figure, but still conservative in its design and the way it hung just over her knees. She had on her matching yellow pumps and a lightly knitted yellow petticoat to complete the outfit. Hank himself was just under 6 feet tall, with military-cropped dark black hair that had begun turning very white along the sides. He already had crow's feet at the corners of his eyes, despite only being just past his mid-30s. He was fit, the life of a solider kept you that way. And being some of the best Marine Force recon, he was in better shape than most. His high cheekbones and angular jaw gave him a matured look. At least, that was what his wife said. Still, he could already feel that he was beginning to lose a step, and was glad he'd be retiring in 4 months. No time for another deployment or anything, just the sweet life with the family now. Hank was dressed in his Sunday suit, an auburn sports coat that accentuated his broad shoulders, a baby blue button-up shirt that he'd left the top few buttons undone on, and a pair of khaki pants that hung comfortably on him, along with his polished brown penny loafers. "Where's Clarissa?" he asked before giving his wife a kiss. Maggie kissed him back, leaving a smear of her lipstick across his face. "Ew," said Bradley, making Hank and Maggie both chuckle. "Ew? Huh? Ew. Is that gross? What if Mommy give you kisses? Cootie monster attack," she said as she slipped past Hank and began to tickle and plant small, rapid-fire kisses along his face and neck. Bradley was overcome by a giggle fit as he shook with laughter and tried to push his mother away, accidentally dropping Elmo to the floorboards. After a moment, Maggie stopped and placed a tender kiss on his forehead before leaning over to pick up his toy and hand it to him. Hank just watched the scene unfold with a wide, happy, proud smile plastered across his face. Maggie looked back over her shoulder to Hank with a smile before nodding with her head. "Over there, talking with Dokote Lai," she said as her smile widened a bit, but her eyes shot him a sarcastic look and raised her eyebrows in challenge. Hank immediately turned and looked in the direction his wife had nodded, spotting his teenage daughter a moment later. Clarissa was standing off to the side of the large white brick church. She was almost the spitting image of her mother, lightly tanned and freckled skin, platinum blonde and curly hair. She was dressed in a white dress and button-up sweater, though she had her sweater off, showing the thin straps of her dress and her bare shoulders, along with too much cleavage for his tastes. Clarissa had a wide smile stretched across her face as she looked up at Dokote. He was the same age as her, tall, just over 6 feet, with unkempt, shaggy black hair that hung down around his face and was parted down the middle. Dokote had a thin, lithe build like a runner and wore a constant grin that stretched his acne-streaked face and turned up the corners of his thin lips surrounded by tiny white heads. The bane of teenagers everywhere, his golden amber eyes glinted in the shade of the church as they stayed singularly focused on Clarissa. Dokote was dressed in a bright red dress shirt left unbuttoned and the sleeves rolled up around his thin elbows. Underneath the dress shirt, he wore a black t-shirt with the stylized silhouette of a wolf printed on it. A pair of clean jeans hung from his narrow waist, and black and white checkered high tops stuck out from under the loose-hanging legs of his jeans. "Leave them be," said Maggie as she finished dotting on her son and closed the door. "Crank up the car, it's hot." Hank nodded and kept his eyes on his daughter as she broke out into laughter as a broad smile spread across her face just as a large, white, puffy cloud moved out from in front of the sun. Hank sighed and moved over, then climbed into the driver's seat and cranked the vehicle up. Hot air blasted from the vents of the minivan for a moment, making Bradley let out a whine of discomfort from the back. "AC's coming, buddy. Just give it a minute," said Hank reassuringly to his son. Within a few seconds, cool air began to fly from the dark plastic vents on the dashboard and spread around the vehicle, making Bradley's whining cease. Hank reached over and unlocked the glove box and pulled out his modified M1911 Colt 45, then slid into his underarm holster safely. Outside, Maggie approached the two teenagers, breaking their attention from one another as they looked up towards her. Hank couldn't hear what was being said, but Maggie gestured towards the van and said something as Clarissa's eyes lit up and she beamed at her mother in the blinding midday Kansas sun. Clarissa said something to her mother, who stopped and thought for a moment before looking over towards the parking lot out front of the Lawrence First Methodist Church. For a moment, Hank thought his wife was looking in their direction. Shit, she just invited him to lunch. Wait, nope, that's not it. Hanks's dark brown eyes moved over and looked out of the window of the minivan before seeing what they were both looking at a few seconds later. A brand new cherry-red Corvette. "Oh, hell no. I'm not letting my... Damn it." Hank's eyes shot back over towards his wife, but she was already nodding in agreement. Clarissa let out a squeal Hank could hear even from inside of the family minivan and let out a sigh as Clarissa threw her arms around her mother and hugged her tightly. Clarissa, Maggie, and Dakota all began to walk towards the parking lot as Hank rolled down the window and leaned out. "He coming with us to the Big Biscuit?" said Hank in a slightly disapproving voice. "Yeah, Mr. Steele. Thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate you letting me hang out with you and your family." "That's really nice of you," said Dakota, still wearing that incessant smirk. Hank looked to Maggie, who just smiled back at him. "Yeah, no problem, Dakota. You two climb in back. I can drop you off back here after lunch." "That's okay, Mr. Steele. I know the way." "Yeah, Dad. Thanks for letting Dakota come. I'll meet y'all there." "Mom said I could ride with Dakota," said Clarissa with a beaming smile. Hank sighed once more and looked to his wife, then looked back to Dakota as Clarissa climbed into the sleek sports car. "All right, I'll follow you. Just don't loose me, okay?" he said, trying to keep some handle on the situation, and a handle on the kid driving like a moron with his daughter in the car. Maggie climbed into the minivan as Dakota got into the car and revved up his engine, making it scream and rumbled. Then he threw the car into reverse and tore out of the parking space. "Son of a," growled Hank. "Language," said Maggie as she cut her husband off. Hank sighed and backed out the old grey minivan before following after the Corvette as it built speed. He could feel his blood pressure rising as he followed the red sports car through traffic as it darted in and out, always at least a block ahead, and making him speed slightly to keep up with it. Maggie could see her husband was getting annoyed. She reached over and gently patted his muscular right arm, then gave his right shoulder a reassuring squeeze. He watched from a block back as the speeding Corvette took a corner too tightly as it turned onto 6th Street. It caught the curb of the median, and there was a loud bang as the left rear tire blew out. Sparks arched through the air as the vehicle immediately slowed and moved to get into the far lane. Hank grimaced and gritted his teeth, making his jaw clench as his brow furrowed. "Easy, babe. He's young and dumb. And your daughter likes him," said Maggie. Hank took in a deep breath and sighed as he slowly made the turn and followed up behind Dakota as he turned the Corvette off onto a side street in front of Constant Park and brought it to a stop. Hank parked the minivan behind Dakota and got out, then moved up towards the vehicle just as the driver door opened. "I'm sorry, Mr. Steele. I guess I took that corner too tight," said Dakota with a raise of the eyebrows and a shrug, his grin still spread across his face. Yeah, well, just go slower next time. It happens to us all, though, at some point. You got tools or a spare? Clarissa, you okay, baby? Said Hank as he called out to his daughter, still seated in the front passenger side of the vehicle. Yeah, Daddy, just scared me is all. Hank nodded and followed Ducote around to the back of the Corvette as his eyes drifted up towards the greying over sky. Better make this fast, looks like it's gonna rain, said Hank. Ducote said nothing as he opened the trunk and began to fiddle with the bed of it. He loosened and lifted it, then fished Tyre out of the trunk. Hey, Mr. Steele, can you help me with something? Yeah, sure thing, kid. What you need? I need you to go kill your wife and son. Hank looked to Ducote to lay into him, tell him off, and maybe even kick the kid's ass. However, as his dark brown eyes met this gleaming golden amber orbs, he felt his conscience shoved aside, and all expression left his face. Confusion, alarm, and then terror all ripped through Hank as he stood from where he was leaned over the trunk of the sports car and drew his .45 from its holster, then turned and moved back towards the minivan. The soft click of a car door opening alerted Hank that Clarissa had just opened her car door and was stepping out. Dad, everything okay? Said Clarissa. Everything's fine. Your dad's just helping me with something, said Ducote as his thin smirk turned into a wide grin. No, baby. Run, get away. Call for help. Daddy! What's going on? Said Clarissa as she watched her father move towards the family minivan like an automaton. Run, baby. Don't look. God, please, Jesus, anybody. Somebody please stop this. Oh, God, no. Jesus, God, no. Dad? Maggie was turned around in her seat, holding Elmo as she gently bounced the toy up and down on Bradley's lap, entertaining him as he smiled and giggled. She looked up as the car door opened, as the sky began to darken more and gentle thunder rumbled overhead. Gotta grab the tools out of the back. Maggie's never finished her sentence. God, no. Daddy, no. Hank opened the driver's side door and leveled the highly customized, rebored and rechambered, cool metal weapon into the vehicle as he'd been trained, as he'd done 1,000 times. No! The report of gunfire filled the air once before he turned the gun, then squeezed the trigger again. Thunder boomed overhead, drowning out the gunshots as the sky darkened, and Clarissa watched the entire horrific act unfold while Ducote stood there smiling. There was a sudden flash of light that turned everything white, blinding Hank and deafening him like an RPG had landed only feet from him. That brief moment was enough for whatever it was to let him back into the driver's seat of his own body, and as his vision cleared, he was left at the horrific sight before him, one he'd done himself but hadn't wanted to. Tears or pain and pure rage poured down his face as he turned his gaze towards Ducote. There was a steaming, cracked and smouldering section of asphalt only feet from him, between him and the Corvette. Rain began to pour down as Ducote looked from Clarissa back to Hank with a look that was a mixture of surprise and absolute glee. Thanks for your help, Mr. Steele. Don't worry about your daughter. I'll take good care of her, he said with a smile. Clarissa stood there, tears ran down her cheeks, but her face was completely emotionless as her hair whipped about in the rapidly building wind as rain cascaded down from the now nearly pitch-black and angry sky above. Hank raised his gun from where it was hung at his side and moved to level it at Ducote. There was a sudden arcing spark of golden light. In the split second it took for the skilled Special Forces soldier to raise his gun in retribution. His daughter, the Corvette, and the grinning maniac that had just brought his entire life crashing down around him were suddenly gone. Hank was left alone as he stood while rain poured down, thunder boomed overhead, and the wind screamed. Hank looked up into the sky above, his dark eyes focused on a single source of light that shone above him, a billboard that read, Luke 13:3, make penance, or all will perish. James E. Thomas. Chapter 16, Running Down a Dream. Thud, 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 thud. Jack awoke to the sound of heavy pounding coming from his front door, incessantly continued without pause. He immediately reached for the top drawer of his bedside table and flung it open, feeling about blindly for only a moment. His hand grasped the cool handle of his .45 caliber pistol. He lifted it as he sat up swiftly. Jack glanced over towards the small square brass alarm clock seated atop his bedside table. It read 5:59 a.m. He watched as the second hand ticked past the 12 on the dial, shifting the hour hand over to 6. The pounding continued. Thud, 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 thud. Jack growled softly, stood and grasped his jeans that lay on the floor next to his bed. He slipped them on as the thudding from the front door continued, then pulled a white t-shirt from the top drawer of his bedside table. He silently moved out of his bedroom and stalked quietly down the hallway, keeping his back to the inner wall of the apartment as he approached the door. Thud, 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 thud. Jack clenched his jaw in anger. Adrenaline began to pump through his body, and time began to feel like it slowed. He grasped the dull grey steel knob of the deadbolt and flipped it quickly, then grabbed the doorknob and turned it. Just as the lock on the doorknob clicked, the door was suddenly pushed in. Jack tried to resist it for a moment, only to find himself shoved back harder as a man with long, dark, curly hair and a thick beard stepped into view, smiling. Jack nearly pulled the trigger, but stopped himself. Jonas looked towards Jack, pressed back against the wall behind the door, gun leveled up at him. "What are you doing back there?" said Jonas with a smile. He held up a box of Krispy Kreme donuts and a cup carrier filled with tall white and green paper cups that were capped with glossy black toppers. Steam billowed out from the tops of the cups as the scent of coffee, pastry, sugar, and chocolate hit Jack's nose. Jack just glared at Jonas for a moment as his stomach rumbled loudly. "I could still shoot you, you know," he growled. Jonas gave Jack an odd, quizzical look as his smile faded to a grin. "I mean, you could, but that wouldn't do much," he said with a shrug before heading down the hallway and towards the kitchen. "You have plates, I assume?" "Yeah, middle shelf, second cabinet right from the sink." "What for?" asked Jack as he pushed the door closed as he stepped out from behind it, then locked it once more. Jonas sighed and rolled his eyes as he flicked on the lights in the kitchen. Jack squinted and then blinked quickly as the phosphorescent lights of the kitchen turned on and began to hum gently. Godless heathen. As Jonas removed 3 old plates with floral pattern around the edges, Jack moved over into the kitchen. The plates were some that Jack's parents bought back in the 70s. "Any of those black?" he asked as he looked to Jonas, who'd set the cup carrier down on the countertop. Jonas nodded as he set out a few hot glazed donuts on each plate. "Yes, but try and figure out which one is which without looking. Practice, Jack. Always practice." Jack rolled his eyes and took in a deep breath through his nose before her let it out. He looked over towards the bearded man dressed in finery, a tailored black silk suit, white cotton shirt, and black silk tie on. The top button of the shirt was left undone, and a pair of black slacks completed the outfit, making Jonas look very much like one of the Blues Brothers. "Seriously?" said Jack with a raised eyebrow as Jonas turned to face him and held out a plate of 3 glossy donuts. "What?" he said as he blinked and feigned confusion for a moment. Jack reached out and grasped one of the coffee cups, then slowly raised it to his lips and took a sip from it slowly. The taste of dark, roasted coffee bean filled his mouth, and he felt clarity begin to set in with his first sip of coffee. Jack pointed to the suit with the index finger holding the coffee cup as he took the plate from Jonas. "Oh, I see. I've been catching up. Watching some programs on this thing you call Netflix, as well as other, streaming services and web channels." It was now Jack's turn to show a look of confusion as he bit down around a hot donut after setting the plate down on the counter next to the oven. As the sweet, rich, fried, doughy goodness melted in his mouth like caramel, Jack's eyebrows furrowed, and his eyes widened slightly in a questioning gaze like he was looking at some sort of anachronism. "I haven't gotten out much since the 70s, said Jonas in a flat tone as he lifted the cup of steaming hot coffee and blew gently on it, and then took a sip. "Seriously?" said Jack after swallowing the bite. "Why? What the hell have you been doing?" Jonas smirked and took a bite of donut. He stared off at the wall for a moment as he breathed through his nose. He took a slow sip of coffee before finally responding. "Hippies." Jack choked on his coffee, then coughed as he looked up with a smile. "Really?" "Absolutely. You see, I tried to reintroduce the old Greek philosophy style of teaching on a few campuses around the United States. I was a professor at the time and hosted a few lectures. Well, it seemed to catch on. but not as I intended, sparking a sort of... He took in a short breath and squinted his eyes as he searched for the appropriate phrasing. Anti-establishment, anti-government, drug culture movement. Jack gave Jonas a quizzical look. You started the hippie movement. Jonas shrugged and lightly shifted his head from side to side slightly as he furrowed his brow once more. That's a bit of an oversimplification, but I suppose you could put it that way. Jonas sighed and raised his cup of coffee once more, looking over the rim of the cup. It wasn't on purpose, so I sat out the last few decades and planned for the future. Jonas fell silent once more and sipped at his coffee as he polished off the first donut. Jack thought for a moment as well, eating and chewing over the story Jonas had just told him. Before either could say anything more, there was a sudden, rapid ringing of the doorbell, followed by 3 hard knocks. "Uncle Jack, get up, it's Cass," came a feminine, high-pitched voice shouting from the other side of the door. Jack sighed and set down his coffee before he moved toward the front door and opened it. Cassie stood there smiling as she looked up at him. "Oh, wow, you're already up." "What's that supposed to mean?" said Jack as he raised an eyebrow and scrunched up his forehead. "Nothing, good morning. Ready to go?" "Ooh, donuts, and I smell coffee." "Yees." Cass pushed past Jack and moved for the kitchen. That left Jack to close the door and follow behind her. She dressed in somewhat fitted jeans, a pair of black and grey Vans sneakers, and a black Coheed and Cambria t-shirt with an emerald dragonfly printed on the front. He only knew of the band because he'd bought her one of their albums for Christmas a few years back. They weren't bad. "Oh, you're here too. Cool. So we ready to go?" "Ooh, can I have some?" asked Cassie as she moved towards the coffee and donuts before hesitating. "Oh, my dad called. So, he said to give him a call." Jonas sighed and rolled his eyes as he waved for her to help herself to the coffee and the third plate of donuts. "May I borrow your phone?" he said as he held his hand out toward her. Cassie hesitated for a moment, but then pulled her glossy pink Apple 4S from her pocket and unlocked it before handing it to him. "What? Wait, did he—" Cassie interjected as she uncapped the remaining 2 cups of coffee. "Dad said he's busy in DC, but Jonas will explain." "Oh, and to not let me go, but screw that." Cassie sniffed each cup and shrugged and settled for the one that appeared to have more cream and sugar. Jonas examined the phone for a moment. He slowly rolled it in his hands as he looked it over. Cassie chuckled and shook her head as she pointed to the correct icon. Jonas nodded and then began to put in the correct number before placing the call. Jack sighed and took his cup of coffee and donuts out into the living room. He sat down on the couch with a low groan as his hip lightly throbbed. He reached for the controller and turned on the TV as he continued to enjoy his coffee and donuts. The death toll in Kansas continues to climb as rescuers search the rubble left in the wake of a series of tornadoes that ripped through Lawrence and the surrounding areas last night. Meteorologists claim the sudden storm was brought on by a series of low-pressure zones that formed over Kansas, meeting high-pressure zones from the north and out of the west. Kansas Governor Mark Parson has already dispatched additional rescue services to Lawrence and petitioned the government for additional aid. The president has sent FEMA to aid in relief efforts, and earlier this morning during a press conference, he had this to say on the matter. "Oh man, that sucks," said Cassie with a frown as she moved out of the kitchen and into the small living room. Jonas, who'd been busy talking on the phone, suddenly stepped out with a look of urgency on his face. "Time to go," he said as he tossed Cass her phone. Jack and Cassie both turned to look at him. Cassie was slightly wide-eyed as her phone sailed through the air towards. She reacted quickly and caught her phone softly with both hands, then pocketed it. "Now?" Jack asked as he gave Jonas a confused look. Jonas was already mid-stride toward the TV. He reached out and pressed the button on the bottom left-hand side and turned it off. "Yes, now." "Hey," said Jack from the couch. "What's up?" asked Cassie as she raised her eyebrows in surprise. Jonas swiftly moved back into the kitchen and picked up the box of donuts and his cup of coffee. "We're behind schedule. Things are accelerating faster than I planned, and Loki is ahead of us. Come on," he said as he walked toward the front door. Jonas set coffee atop the box for a moment. He opened the front door and headed out into the hallway, then moved down the stairs swiftly. Jack let out a sigh and rolled his eyes before he looked to Cassie. "Come on," she said as she headed out of the door after Jonas. Jack got to his feet. Thankfully, he'd packed the night before. He moved to his room as he licked the sticky sugar glaze from his fingertips. He dressed quickly and slipped his 45 into his underarm holster, then tossed on a light denim jacket. Jack grabbed his olive green rucksack from beside the door and shouldered it, then headed out. He grabbed his keys, wallet, and phone on the way out the door and locked it behind him. As he reached the first floor, he stopped as he saw the open door to Mr. Tran's office and apartment. He paused and knocked gently on the doorframe. The old man looked up from his recliner where he was seated. "Soldier boy, good morning." "Good morning, Mr. Tran. I'm going to be out of town for a little while, so I figured I'd go ahead and pay the next few months' rent." You have my contact info, so just give me a call if there's a problem, or if you think any more about taking on an investor for this place." A wide smile stretched across Mr. Tran's wrinkled face. He wasn't used to tenants wanting to pay several months' rent up front. He stood swiftly and moved over to the teller window, made of reinforced glass, that sat behind metal bars. He opened a leather glasses case seated on the counter and slipped them on before beginning to slowly click a few buttons on the old computer. Jack just shook his head and grinned as he took a few steps over to the window and pulled out his wallet before handing over his debit card. "How many month?" Jack scrunched up eyebrows as he looked up slightly and thought for a second. How's about 6 months? I'll come back by or contact you over phone if it's longer." Mr. Tran looked up a bit confused. "Where you going?" Jack looked over through the glass doors that led out to the parking lot. From here, he could see Cassie as she pulled what looked to be 2 large pink pieces of luggage from the trunk of her car while Jonas stood waiting next to Jack's Jeep. He has a single, large brown and tan patterned piece of luggage with leather trim. It looked rather old, like something Jack's grandparents would have used. A long, antique-looking, leather-upholstered fishing pole-carrying case was leaned up against the Jeep behind Jonas. "I have no idea. Just kinda going with the flow, you get me?" Mr. Tran just smiled wide in a strange, knowing way. He nodded slowly and looked back to the old, dimly glowing projection monitor. He swiped Jack's card, then slipped it back to Jack through the slot. "Thanks, Mr. Tran," said Jack with a slight smile and nod, before he turned and headed out through the double glass doors toward the parking lot. He moved toward his Jeep as he spun his keys on his finger. Cassie pulled her 2 rolling luggage bags up as Jack just shook his head. "You pack enough?" She just shot him daggers with her eyes. "Hey, we have no idea how long we're going to be gone, and besides I couldn't leave it all in the dorms. So I rented a little storage unit and stuffed my things in there." "Where the hell did you get the money for that?" asked Jack as he unlocked the Jeep and started to toss his things and Cassie's into the back. "Left over from scholarships and grant money," said Cassie with a mischievous smile. Jack let out a long sigh as Jonas lifted up his piece of luggage and gave the two a rather impatient look. "Shall we? Loki's already got his first target and has tried taking another one. We need to get ahead of him. So we're going to go save a potential recruit and then see how many more we can get. Our first stop was Kansas, but now we're heading to California. The faster the better." Jack's eyebrows furrowed a bit, and as a concerned look spread across his face a moment. He looked over to Cassie, only to find her with the same worried expression he imagined plastered across his own face. Kansas. That had just been on the news. It had to be a coincidence, right? Then he remembered Jonas' words from the earlier night, and a sickening, sinking feeling began to build in his gut. "Let's go," said Jack in a serious tone as he turned and climbed into his Jeep. "Dibs," said Jonas smoothly and suddenly. "Shotgun. Damn it," said Cassie a split second too late. Jonas smirked and moved toward the front as Cassie got into the back, then Jack cranked up the Jeep and they took off. James E. Thomas. Chapter 17. Roll on down the highway. "Go faster," said Jonas as he stared out of the window at the flat, arid, dusty scrublands of western Texas. It stretched on as far as the eye could see, along with an endless sky dotted with small, puffy clouds here and there. "No, damn it, and stop saying that. It got old an hour after we started this morning, and that was 10 hours ago," Jack growled back. "Then go faster." "Damn it, no, I ain't getting a ticket." You have superhuman senses and reaction time, correct? And there are no highway patrol around. Go faster. Jack groaned and rolled his eyes for a second. He stared at the road, tapping the paddle for the cruise control and increasing it another 5 miles per hour up to 80. He had a point, but Jake wasn't about to admit that. Jonas let out a long sigh and rolled his eyes before looking out of the window with a rather bored expression plastered across his face. I did stress the urgency of the situation, correct? People being kidnapped, evil fey trickster, etc., ad nauseum, etc., ad infinitum. Look, damn it, first I don't speak ancient Greek or whatever, shot back Jack. Latin, actually, interjected Jonas. Jack gritted his jaw and looked over at Jonas with a stern and fiery gaze. Secondly, what the hell's fey mean? What are you talking about? Evil fairy stuff, like that witch from Sleeping Beauty, or more Tinkerbell or something, 'cause you lost me there. And thirdly, you haven't really explained shit to me. Cassie, who'd had been quietly listening to her music since after lunch, chimed in. He's right. I mean, you both are. It was Latin, not Greek, and you haven't really told us fuck all. Language, said Jack. Cassie grinned. And yeah, Uncle Jack, he's talking about evil fairies, I think, she said before she fell silent again, leaving one earbud out to listen. He didn't look like a fairy, not that kind anyway. Cassie snorted once as she let out a giggle. Jonas took in a deep breath and turned to look at them both. I'd prefer to not have to repeat myself, but since we only have time at the moment, long, long ago. In a galaxy far, far away, cut in Cassie. Jack grinned and chuckled lightly. Jonas grinned and nodded. Correct. Wait, seriously? Asked Cassie as her eyes widened. Now then, my name is Prometheus of House Iapetus. I am a Titanian, one of 2 species on my homeworld, Titan. The Titanians ruled a vast empire spanning multiple solar systems across the galaxy, what you call the Milky Way. The other race came from us, but was a divergent subspecies. They were still Titanians, but many viewed them as second-class citizens, or flawed in some way. This partly came from their inherent differences. All Titanians have what you'd call superpowers of varying forms, most related to family and heritage. The caste system of Titanian society functioned around the basis of these powers. The most powerful families ruled and inherited their given names and abilities from their forefathers and the founders of our civilization and culture. Our caste systems and names were also based around these family names, and many intermarried. The subspecies, though, had powers more related to the mind, to what you would call psychic abilities. Okay, why does this matter? Said Jack with a bored look. So, you're saying it's like people with the last name Smith. Some of them are related to each other, but not all, and it's distantly related, right, or only in name. You're getting at the whole incest thing, right? A disgusted look spread over Cassie's face for a moment before she continued. And the names dealt with what people did as jobs, so like Smith was originally the last name of people that were blacksmiths, said Cassie as she cut in once more. Jonas shot Jack an annoyed look, but looked back to Cassie with an approving smile. Correct, to a point. A civil war began to erupt between the Titanians and a group of rebels within the Olympians. I was a pilot with my brothers aboard the finest ship the Empire had ever built, the Olympus. She was powered by a new form of energy we'd discovered and harnessed into an experimental reactor, the Nexus reactor, the first of its kind. Jonas opened his bottle of Lipton iced tea and took a long sip from it before wincing at the taste. He capped the top of the bottle and looked at it with a disgusted look before dropping it back into the cup holder. The Nexus reactor was able to harness and collect all of the various potential energies of the universe and focus them into a usable nexus of inexhaustible energy for the ship's drives and systems to pull from. As Jonas spoke, he gestured with his hands, pulling them through the air like the very particles and atoms of the air, and the ether between them was the stuff he was speaking of. She was incredible, he said with a small smile and a faraway look in his deep eyes. But a group of nobles of the various ruling houses came to visit the ship, and upon boarding her they led a coup and stormed the bridge. The rebels had infiltrated even the nobility of my home. Their leader was a man named Cronus, the rightful heir of House Cronus, and future ruler of our people. He was assisted by his cousins, Zeus of House Cronus, and his two brothers Poseidon and Hades. Cronus, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, along with the rest of the nobility's private security forces, were able to take the untested ship and her skeleton crew with little trouble. A regretful look stretched softly over his face as he turned to look out of the passenger side window. I had two brothers of my own, Menoetius and Epimetheus, along with friends on the crew I didn't wish to see die, said with a small, cynical smile. We couldn't let these rebels get away with treason. They were attempting to defect from the Empire and flee the war. They ordered us to set a course and take her out, he said with a smirk. At the last moments, due to some brilliant calculations and piloting, I was able to change the course. However, Jonas sighed slowly and took in a deep breath. The Olympus was untested, her drives and reactor overloaded. We were sent plummeting from space as the ship broke apart around us, turning us into nothing and remaking us as everything we are now. As he said this, he turned back to face them and held out his hands and arms forward slightly, as if presenting himself for some kind of admonishment. The Olympus bound itself to the potential energies of this world and infused us with them. It changed us, making us more of what we already were, and less of what we had been before. We quickly learned to control our new gifts as we emerged into a primitive world filled with primitive peoples and other strange beings we had never encountered. His voice shifted tone, sounding more filled with wonder, as though he could see those early days before his eyes even now. So we began to teach early man, building civilizations as we saw fit and shaping your society slowly, creating weapons, armies, cities, children. Not all of us were happy with the clearly one-sided arrangement, and many of your people weren't happy with it either, though there was little they could do. Jonas fell silent a moment and took in a deep breath before he let it out slowly through his nose as the smile faded from his face. More conflict happened. We fought with each other, learned how to kill one another, and in some cases did far worse. Those once viewed as a lesser race among us rose to dominate here. Many were even more gifted and empowered by their changes than the pure-blooded Titanians like myself were. They dubbed themselves the Olympians, after the ship that had changed them and caused our rebirth, placing themselves higher than the Titanians, he said with a slight eye-roll and coy smirk. We fought, we explored the world, we experimented with things discovered here, and made allies or enemies with the others that we found already among you, either from the stars, other realms, or ones who had always been here beside you. He paused and took in another slow breath. But in our warring with one another, you learned how to make war on us. A war between man and gods began. Jonas slumped back in the chair as he stared out the front windshield at the road ahead. The gods were divided. Some of us saw the irony of the situation and seeking to change fate sided with man. Others saw themselves superior, that it was their right to rule and dictate the lives of man and be worshipped by them, do with them as they wished. By the whole Prometheus gave fire to man legend, I'm guessing that you sided with us, said Jack. Jonas smiled a bit and nodded at Jack. Correct. I'm impressed that a simple man like you knows the myth, Jack. Jack scoffed and Cassie smiled and let out another soft giggle from behind them. I did, though. That happened far earlier in the story. I suppose in a way I became the rebel, a trickster. I did it partly out of spite, but also because I had finally seen the error of my own ways. I sided with you, and in time a number of others did as well. Athena, Aphrodite, Hephaestus, Hera, Hermes, Zeus, and many more. Others sided against you like Hades, Ares, Hel and her husband Loki, to name their leaders. Any smile faded from his face. They sought obliteration of mankind and domination over any that survived. A totalitarian reign to last forever, here and after. Jack looked to Jonas with a worried expression along with Cassie. They could both see that he didn't seem to be joking. Jack hadn't even heard his heart rate increase or change at all. No sense of a lie. They devised a plan and struck. Faster than we could react. It was a show of force, a use of a superweapon they had devised. An entire civilization was wiped from the globe, making it sink from reality into nothing, to nowhere. Its people forever gone, trapped outside of death, but in a moment of inescapable destruction, pain, terror. Jonas only frowned, eyes sadly looking forwards out at the sky above the road. By working with man, we struck back hard and fast. You had grown powerful, developed your own heroes, and your own powers in many ways. Hades and the others were not prepared for what came. We captured him, bound him, and imprisoned him forever in cage, not too unlike that which he sacrificed so many to. Then we tossed his cell on top of the few ruins left as a harsh reminder of his defeat, as an example and warning to his horsemen and acolytes of the apocalypse. Jonas fell silent for a moment. Everyone in the car remained silent, only the hum of the wheels on the road and the sound of the wind whipping over and around the Jeep as it sped down the interstate. Afterwards, an accord was struck. We would not interfere in the affairs of man anymore, not directly. You'd remain ignorant of us. We'd fade into history, obfuscate our stories with myths and legends. We'd accept our lives among you or remove ourselves from society. Jonas slowly took in a deep breath and frowned. Some of us retreated and others learned to adapt. Many of the others left in time, and if we had children with mortals, then we were not to interfere in their lives, tell them of their true nature, or reveal ourselves to them. Jonas stretched some and yawned. Now we endeavor to only help you find your way. Jack remained silent for a moment as Cassie kind of took it all in, wondering whether or not to believe the wild story. Much of it did make sense in a way. And Loki's trying to break Hades out and rebuild his army. How powerful is the person he just got his hands on? And what can Loki do? Questioned Jack. Oh, many things. He is a powerful half-fae. Magic comes as naturally to him as breathing. Since the fae are from a reality adjacent to this one that is closer to the primordial source of magic, they are all capable of wielding magic to many ends to suit their own needs, warping reality around them to varying degrees and affects, Jonas explained. However, their true danger lies in that they have mastered the art of turning living beings, even themselves, into magical, organic weapons of terrifying power. Loki has his own powers of control, charm, shape-changing, and mimicry. As to how powerful the young teenager was that he took, possibly one of the most powerful on the planet, an elemental. Her powers are still unrealized for now, so go faster. Jack didn't know what to think, but a teenage girl kidnapped by that freak didn't sit well with him. He pressed down the pedal, making the Jeep accelerate as the engine revved up past 90. They're following us. We're not safe. Turn here, quick. Oh, right. The scary family in the minivan is secretly a bunch of federal sleeper agents. Pssh. Ha 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 ha. We should go back and take care of them just to make sure, maybe interrogate them first. Scanning. VIN number indicates vehicle is registered to 1. Control yourselves, gentlemen, please. We turned less than half an hour ago to divert unwanted attention. We're heading into Nevada to avoid further— Shut up! Val gripped the crown once more with one hand and tried to pull it free in an attempt to silence the different voices in his head. He gritted his teeth, pulling hard as the back of his head throbbed, and he felt the roots of his dreads beginning to snag on the metal. Ow, 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 ow. Ow, 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 ow. Ow, 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 ow. Val grunted and released the control crown as his head throbbed. He winced lightly as he pushed his fingertips around under the padded metal bands of the crown and tried to feel for where it was. His thick dreads got in the way as he felt blindly, feeling warm metal pressing firmly to his skin for a moment, but he couldn't feel which part of the crown it was, or how it was stuck. He gave up and slumped back in the chair, looking out of the windshield digitally showing speed, humidity, wind speed, direction of travel, altitude, and more. One of you take the wheel, and no course corrections. We aren't turning around again to go to Reno or Vegas. Oh. Val took in a deep breath and let out a long sigh of fatigue. He was tired, mentally, emotionally, and physically. He'd been driving for over 12 hours now and made it out of California, through Nevada, and into Arizona. He was just outside of Phoenix now. Val's mind drifted to its inner space, seeing a vast array of computers like one would expect to see at NASA or the Nuclear Launch Command in war games. There, he saw at least a half dozen or more other versions of himself, all moving about from terminal to terminal as they bickered or talked about various things. One of his alternates, that was dressed in a Spider-Man costume, struggled as he was pulled from the lead terminal that had a massive monitor set before it. It took up an entire wall of the room, displaying the view through Val's eyes as he watched the road speed by. An android version of himself with pale skin, slicked back, red hair and yellow eyes, dressed in a Starfleet uniform with gold about the shoulders, sat calmly behind the terminal and began to drive. Val's eyes drifted about as the other alternates shoved Spider-Man him off to the side. Behind Val were more terminals with various versions of himself, none with quite as much personality or style as the ones near the front of the room. In fact, they all looked like copies of one another, all dressed in lab coats, white dress shirts, and khaki slacks with business cuts. Each one talked with the others and coordinated to carry out commands from the 7 other versions of him that were in command of them, or so it seemed. He'd begun to make some sense of it, and he better learn to control whatever all this was. There was the version of him always dressed in some superhero costume, currently Spider-Man. Then there was one that looked more like a snidely Whiplash version of himself, complete with waxed handlebar mustache, dark coat, and top hat. A sterner version of himself dressed in an immaculate power suit and wearing gold-rimmed glasses. A paranoid, wild-haired, disheveled version of himself, dressed like the other cronies behind him, but his tie was undone, his white shirt untucked, and the top few buttons of his wrinkled shirt were undone. There was the coldly logical, Commander Data-like android version of himself. Then there was a version of himself dressed in a bowling shirt, with khaki shorts and a pair of flip-flops on, holding a cocktail and a cigarette. The second to the last version of himself was dressed in a fine tuxedo with tails, holding a cigar and wielding a cane. Val's eyes fell on final version of himself as he turned. This version was standing at the far back of the room, beyond the cronies. He stood with his back up against the door in the middle of the aisle that ran the length of the room from back to front, up to the main control terminal. From this distance, Val couldn't make him out as he stood in the doorway, long shadows concealing his appearance in darkness. But Val could feel him looking right back at him. He said nothing, did nothing. This version didn't even move. It only stared back at Val from within the shadows that concealed it. Val looked back to the control terminal. Scan the ATV again. Make sure it's not broadcasting and we didn't miss anything. I just want to check again to make sure we aren't being traced. Has there been anything on the news yet? Scan complete. All wireless transmission from the vehicle are either currently being jammed or have been disabled, said the android avatar. There's nothing on the news as of now, sir. Radio broadcasts, internet or television. No mentions on social media or YouTube either, from what I can tell, replied the gentlemanly version of himself. It's the government, man, I'm telling you. They covered it up. Don't want the public to know that they built some top-secret superweapon and it's out. They're trying to cover it up, man. The conspiracy theorist clone of him shot out. That's highly doubtful. I mean, the government most likely has kept the disappearance of the vehicle, and us, quiet. We know the specs on this thing, anti-cyber terrorism response vehicle, sure. Superweapon, I don't think so, countered the businessman version of him. All right, good job. Find us someplace to stop, guys. I need to pull in and get something to eat. I'm fucking starving and I need to get some sleep. Affirmative. The internet and digital code flew through his mind as a list of hotels and motels began to pop up in his mind's eyes. He sighed and scrolled through them as he focused. The Sheraton. It was near the interstate, had a good security feed and a good connection. He tapped into the feed and did a quick scan of the hotel's security cameras, database, and registry. It all looked clear, at least as good as he could tell anyways. Truthfully, he had no idea what he was really looking for when it came to spies or federal agents other than bank account numbers and the like. He made himself a reservation for a penthouse suite under the name Victor Stone before going a bit wide-eyed at the price. He couldn't cover that. Besides, he was a broke-ass college kid, and he'd left his wallet in his car in the dorm parking lot back in Berkeley. He didn't even have a few spare bucks on him for a vending machine. He wasn't about to turn his phone back on or call his mom. He didn't want to drag her into this. Val tried to collect himself for a moment. He frowned as he thought about his mother and how worried she'd probably be right now. His mind then drifted back to the problem at hand. He changed some coding as easily as thinking it and comped himself the room, marking it down as due to a missed flight and frequent stays racked up. He also comped himself dinner and a couple bottles of wine as well. He needed a drink. Val sat quietly with his head resting in his hand, running his fingertips and thumb over the smooth, cool metal bands of the control crown as he thought. Mind racing but too tired to focus clearly on any singular problem. After about another 30-minute drive, the ATV pulled into the Sheraton. Val got out after he pulled up his hood, grabbed his pipe, his nearly empty bag of weed, and his lighter. He locked up the vehicle and set its security cameras on a passive stakeout mode before slowly making his way inside. After a quick check-in at the desk, some odd looks, and a short elevator ride up near the top, Val finally let out a sigh of relief as he stepped into the luxurious, beautiful penthouse hotel room with a view overlooking the pool and sunning areas below. Phoenix's skyline stretched out before him as the sun faded and set behind the horizon, and as it did, the lights of the city began to illuminate the streets and sky. He moved over to the couch, mentally turning on the TV, lowering the temperature, and giving himself access to all of the channels. There were some perks to all this at least. James E. Thomas. Chapter 18, Come Together. They were 5 miles outside of Phoenix when Jack's phone started to vibrate in his pocket while Creedence Clearwater Revival's Fortunate Son began to play. It was his set ringtone for Steve. Jack knew what the song was about, and in some way supported it to a degree, but mainly it was a part of Americana that he loved, and he knew it ticked the general off. What better way to keep his buddy's head out of his own ass than by keeping him humble? Jack reached for his phone and pulled it from his pocket. He was still amazed by these smartphones. It wasn't that long ago he had an old Nokia brick. About damn time you called your son of a. Jack, we don't have long. I'll contact you again later tonight if all goes well. I'll explain things better then. I need you to listen. Came the stern, serious tone of his friend from the other end. Jack had heard that tone of voice in his friend before and knew when it was serious. This was a mission briefing. Copy. We've been tracking the target since he left UC Berkeley with government property. We've kept it quiet on the news and on the radio so far, but that won't last forever. I need you to recover him and the vehicle. You can't miss it. His name is Valentin Technikov. We don't see him as too much of a potential risk for now, but he is a very valuable asset that we need kept safe and has other assets on him that the government wants back. He is a high-flight risk. An hour ago, he checked into the Downton Sheraton Hotel in Phoenix off of I-10. He's in room 3004. Approach him carefully and do not harm the asset. We need him to trust us, secure him and keep him safe. I'll contact you afterwards. Have Jonas cover the room. We're trying not to tip him off. But it's possible that just by contacting you like this, that he's already been alerted. He's probably going to know you're coming either way. Good luck. The phone went quiet. Cassie was beginning to stir in the back seat and yawned and stretched as she rubbed at her eyes. Jonas was looking over, having caught parts of the conversation, but not all of it. His hearing was good, but not as good as Jack's. What did he say? Said Jonas. Was that my dad? Asked Cassie before yawning wide once more. Yeah, we're going into to recover and secure one of these other supers, I guess. Cassie, I want you to stay with the Jeep and guard around the building. Whoever this guy is, I'm betting you can chase him down and stop him if he does bolt. Just be careful, okay? And don't break his jaw, said Jack with a grin. Cassie rolled her eyes and sighed before turning to look out of the windows. Fine, but I want tamales tonight then. Jonas was still staring at Jack with a look of impatience for once. It made Jack smile for a moment before the sternness of Jonas's eyes seemed to deepen. Sorry, the Sheraton. Room 3004, he said be fast but careful and don't hurt him or scare him. Jonas nodded and sighed. Go faster, we have to get there quick. After smoking a bowl and taking a moment to breathe, Val hopped into the shower. He was just getting out when he felt a flood of thoughts shoot through his mind. I'm Aquaman, shouted his superhero avatar. Cellular signal scan detected mention of username. Tracking source. Source found. Virginia, Arlington, 22202. Pentagon address confirmed. The data-like avatar called out, "Oh shit, it's the feds. They're coming for us, man. They tracked us. I told you. We gotta go, man. We gotta go." Val's conspiracy theorist avatar shouted as he began to panic. Val nearly slipped in the large, finely tiled walk-in shower. Adrenaline shot through him as he threw himself back against the grey-green tiled wall of the shower. He hugged close to it as a flash of images, maps, digital code, and data flashed before his eyes. He could see the source of the ping from the cell phone. However, trying to look at the Pentagon had been like hitting a wall. From the phone and the data on it, he was able to get a read of the person. Master Sergeant Jackson Sinclair Majors, age 38, medical discharge. Parents deceased, no spouse. Godfather of one Cassandra Barrett. Recent target of a gang-related hit, full recovery, discharged after 48 hours. Then he hit a brick wall of code again, as he was shut out from digging any further. All of the medical files had been sealed behind a DoD firewall he couldn't crack. That was a first. Val began to fully panic and fumbled with the knobs on the shower before turning it off. He stumbled from the shower and grabbed for one of the large, fluffy, folded white towels nearby before beginning to dry himself off as he darted out of the bathroom. A sudden knock at the door made him spin rapidly and fall flat to the floor as he ducked for cover behind the bed. His vision changed once more, accessing the hall cameras and enhancing. His heartbeat only slowed slightly as he saw a woman standing there in a hotel uniform behind a serving tray. The room service he'd ordered. "It's a trap," shouted his panicking conspiracy theorist avatar again. Val hesitated and did a quick digital scan of the woman through the camera. He could access her phone, social media, and more. His blood pressure began to drop, and the pounding in his ears slowed as he realized she was just a hotel employee. The knock came again. "Room service, you called for dinner," she announced in a slightly raised voice. Val let out a long, shaky sigh and stood. He slowly approached the door while still scanning her from the other side as his stomach grumbled loudly. Thanks, just leave it and I'll grab it, okay?" Val called out from behind the door. He waited a moment, watching as the woman turned to leave and headed back to the elevator. Another sigh of relief left him. Val quickly opened the door and pulled the tray back inside before he shut the door behind him. "Boss, I don't think we have time for this right now," said his more businessman avatar. "Well, we are fucking making time. I ordered this damn steak and I'm gonna eat it. I'm hungry, stressed out, and all of you have me panicking. I'm eating this steak and then we'll run." Val shouted aloud to himself. Val grabbed the robe from the bathroom and slipped it on, finding the feel of the soft, fluffy white cotton soothing. He grasped the tray with one hand and tugged it along behind him before sitting down on the bed and letting out another sigh of exasperation. He uncovered the food set on the serving tray and pulled the plate closer before digging in. The steak, rice pilaf, and asparagus tasted incredible as he rapidly devoured the food. As he ate, he mentally turned on the TV, switching over to G4 to see if he'd missed anything. His other selves were monitoring feeds from the news, the hotel's CCTV, cellular towers, and coordinating with one another. "We really don't have time for this, boss. Judging by their increased speed, they will be here sooner than anticipated," the businessman persona added. Speed of travel approximately 90 miles per hour. ETA, including check-in, approximately 9 minutes, 54 seconds. His android avatar stated matter-of-factly. "We need to go, man. We need to go." His conspiracy theorist avatar was still losing his shit and stuffing random pieces of paper into a shredder now. "Make them get in a car crash. Kill them," Val's more villainous avatar added. "I think that's a bit overkill. Perhaps we can just have a gentlemanly conversation with them." The more refined avatar countered. "Shut up," Val yelled aloud. The voices in his mind seemed to quiet some, but there was always a light thrum. He sighed in exhaustion and frowned before looking back down to the food. He was upset, tired, angry, scared, but he was also hungry. All of this was ruining his appetite. He dug into the mashed potatoes, taking a bite of the meat every now and again. "Fuck it. They want me. Come and get me. I'll broadcast this shit everywhere and have SWAT here in minutes. They won't make it out of the parking lot. Bring it." A little before 4:30 p.m., Jack's Jeep pulled into the parking lot at the Downton Sheraton. He pulled up into a parking space and was about to get out before Jonas turned to him. "Go ahead and head upstairs to see if you can cut him off before he gets away. I'll take care of the rooms and Cassandra will call you when we're checked in. Go, fast." Jack shot him a slightly annoyed look but nodded seriously before he got out and walked toward the front doors as a bellhop stepped out through the twin sliding glass doors. Jack dashed forwards. He built in speed to max sprint and blew past the men like a gust of wind, just faster than their eyes could see, but only barely. The bellhop swatted at the air, thinking whatever it was to be a hornet, horsefly, or something similar. He missed. Jack shot through the lobby and down the hallway to the staircase. He slowed down enough to not blow out his shoes or the doorframe as he tossed it open and jetted up the stairs, making him slow considerably with all of the sharp turns in the tight stairwell. He reached the top and reduced his speed to a brisk walk as he opened the door and headed down the hallway of the 30th floor. Val sat in his hotel room, staring at the TV with wide eyes. He'd tossed the CCTV display, news, and a dozen other channels up onto the TV and had been watching as the Jeep pulled in. When Jack got out and then practically vanished from the frame, Val's heart began to flutter and adrenaline surged through his body once more as he started to breathe rapidly. The voices in his head stayed silent but managed to track the figure through multiple frames by slowing down the footage. Val had no idea how fast he was moving at the moment. He was too panicked. How anybody could move that fast was impossible. He prepared to signal local SWAT, DOD, reaching out with his mind to try and ready to make contact with anyone that could come to his defense. Then there was a soft knocking at the door. "Hey, Valentine, right? Listen, I'm Jack, okay? I ain't here to hurt you, all right? I just want to talk and explain things. You're probably freaking out worse than I was. Well, let's just talk, and is that steak?" Jack had approached at a slow, casual walk before knocking and beginning to call out. He could hear the person inside breathing heavily and faintly heard their heart pounding through the heavy insulated metal door. Then his senses had picked up the smell of a finely cooked steak, mashed potatoes with butter, and grilled asparagus. The only thing he'd had since the breakfast this morning was a few strips of jerky and some Hardee's, though they called it Carl's Jr. here. Val tightened up and was about to hit the panic button and go full red alert, when then comment about steak threw him for a loop, along with the thick Texan drawl. What the hell? Val slowly stood from the bed and approached the door before looking out of the eye-hole. "You chill, dude." Jack scrunched up his face as the voice of the young man that came back from the other side of the door, along with the odd question. "What the hell? Yeah, I guess. I'm pretty laid back when I can be, you know what I mean? Don't worry, brother, I'm one of the good guys. I'm here to rescue you." Val sighed a bit and sucked up his fear as his anxiety seemed to retreat slightly for the moment. In one go, he'd made an earnest reference and Star Wars reference. The guy couldn't be all that bad. Val opened the door just beyond a crack and peered out as Jack looked back out with a quizzical look as his eyes moved from the control crown and tangle of dripping dreads down to the pasty, freckled kid they were attached to. "Doc Brown, I presume?" Val grinned and opened the door a bit wider. Nah, I wish. Come on in, I guess. So you have, like, superpowers too?" Jack grinned. "Funny, I was gonna ask you the same thing, man. How's about I get us some beers and get me one of them steaks, and we'll talk more about it." James E. Thomas. Chapter 19, Secrets. Val moved aside as Jack stepped in. Jack towered a good foot or more over the average-looking redhead. "Don't trust him, man, it's a trick," Val's conspiracy theorist avatar shouted. "We should show a bit of caution, boss," the more corporate avatar added. "Military record shows exemplary performance." Val's more data-like avatar countered in his own way. "Avengers assemble," the nerdy superhero avatar exclaimed excitedly. "So what can you do?" asked Val. Jack shrugged and then thought about it for a moment before smiling. I guess the standard Superman kind of stuff." Val's eyes shot wide. "You can fly." Jack laughed. "Haha, nah, I wish. No, just kinda run super fast, jump far, and I got better senses and stuff." No X-ray vision or nothing from what I can tell, though. I'm pretty strong and tough, too. Basic, better, faster, stronger stuff. What about you? Val kinda stood there silently for a moment, feeling like he'd somehow drawn the short straw. Oh, I control machines and stuff, I think. Just kinda, had my origin story yesterday, I guess, or day before. I've been up a while, man, Val said as he moved over to the bed and took a seat. He looked over to the TV, still displaying a dozen or more smaller screens on it of CCTV footage, news coverage, and more. He began to make the various channels change one by one. The TV then flickered and returned to normal as the local news took up the entire screen. Then he started to flip Jack's service record across the screen, what parts of it he was able to access. Jack was impressed, but also a bit perturbed that someone could just control machines and access information like that from anywhere. Damn, cool. But, can you not? Val looked up and cocked his head slightly. Oh yeah, sorry. I, tapped your phone, I guess, and did a search. I thought you guys were coming to kill me or something like the other ones. Other ones, said Jack as he pushed the door closed. His phone buzzed in his pocket and Jack retrieved it before glancing down. It was Cassie. Can I come up? Are we checked in? Is what she'd sent him. One sec, man, it's my goddaughter, said Jack as he raised and wiggled the phone in the air. Oh, Cassandra, said Val before realizing he'd just done something creepy. He grimaced a bit and cast an apologetic look at Jack. Sorry, go ahead. Jack looked back at Val with a questioning and slightly concerned expression, then started to type away on his phone. And no peeking at my messages, man. Shit's weird. Val smirked and nodded as he let the TV switch back over to the news. Yeah, all clear, he typed out, but then stopped. He deleted a bit and wrote back. Yeah, everything's okay. Come on up. Room 3004. Ask the asshole for our room keys. He pressed send and caught the last part of the newsfeed. At large and wanted for the alleged murder of his wife and 3-year-old son, and the disappearance of his 18-year-old daughter, Clarissa. Steele is a Master Sergeant in the Marine Corps, and member of their prestigious Force Recon, who has done 4 tours in Middle East. Steele was last seen exiting the Bastrop Federal Corrections Institution earlier today after a riot ensued. At first, what was believed to be an attempted escape by inmates of the prison turned out to be something entirely different. Eyewitnesses at the prison claimed to have seen someone dressed in a guard's uniform single-handedly disabling several of the prison's guards after infiltrating it. This lone gunman was able to access one of the wings at the prison where members of MS-13 were being held. Many of these gang members were currently awaiting trial for their alleged crimes which came to light upon the discovery of a human trafficking ring operating out of Austin, Texas. These convicts were supposedly uncovered and brought to justice by Austin's vigilante, who many have taken to calling Sergeant Major. For the citizens of nearby Austin, they have begun to wonder where their supposed superhero was and why he didn't come to stop this madman. It is uncertain as to what happened inside of the prison, but so far at least 12 prisoners are dead, with 4 others in critical condition, along with at least a dozen other prisoners and guards being treated for gunshot wounds and other injuries. Steele was able to evade police capture after fleeing the prison in a stolen vehicle, before abandoning it off of Interstate 10 and fleeing on foot. Hank Steele is still at large and is considered to be armed and extremely dangerous. Citizens are advised to not approach Mr. Steele if spotted and to call local or federal authorities. Val stared in disbelief at the TV screen. Damn, was all he said before looking up to Jack. Jack was standing there staring down at the TV in silence, frowning heavily. He didn't have a family, not one like that anyways. The closest thing he had to a daughter was Cassie, and he hadn't spoken to his brother in a few years since Mom and Dad had passed away. Aunts and uncles too were gone, cousins were distant. It was lonely, but it hadn't bothered him until recently. Military life had kept him busy. God only knows what kinds of things he'd do to a person that messed with them, especially now. It was a sobering thought, and one that made him draw his mind back to basics, escalation of force. Loki was to blame for this. He did this to that Marine, and he was going to do far worse to others if he could. He probably already had done worse. Yeah, horrible stuff. In fact, that's kinda why we're here, said Jack. Val scrunched up his forehead as he looked at Jack. What do you mean? Jack sighed. Well, I mean there's people after you. People worse than that, and we're gonna stop 'em. Val was about to say something when there was a sudden knock at the door that made him jump. The TV flipped immediately back over to the CCTV feed as the lights flickered slightly. Jack looked from the lights over to the TV and then to Val before nodding to him. Easy, Mr. Wizard. I think it's just my friends. Val took in a deep breath and slowly let it out as he rested his hands on his thighs and rubbed at the soft, fluffy white robe. Jack moved towards the door. By the smells alone, he could tell who it was. He opened the door. Hey, he said before nodding his head back towards the interior of the hotel suite. Cassie and Jonas pushed past Jack as Jonas held out a shiny green laminated card key with Sheraton printed across it in stylized script. Jack took it and slipped it into his back pocket. Hey, Valentine. Val, corrected the dreaded-up Ginger as he looked to Jack with a slightly bemused smirk. Right, sorry. Hey, Val, this is my goddaughter Cassie, and that's Jonas, said Jack as he nodded his head in each of their directions. I'm gonna go grab my crap out of my Jeep and get those beers. Maybe see what else I can get downstairs. I'll be back up in a bit. It was a quick trip downstairs, this time by elevator and back out to his Jeep. He grabbed his few belongings out of the back and headed back inside before ducking into the small shop set up inside. It was the usual crap: candy bars, chips, sodas, condoms, pain relievers, all marked way the hell up. Jack moved over and grabbed a six-pack of Yuengling from a fridge nearby before moving towards the counter. He was about to reach for his wallet and pay the nearly $20 for the six-pack when a thought passed through his mind. He grinned. Hang on, be right back, said Jack with a wide smile. He set the six-pack down on the counter and his duffel bag on the floor beside it. He turned and headed back, grabbing some cans of salsa, cheese dip, chips, and more beer before carrying it all back over to the counter. And let me get 2 of those cigars, Tool, he said with a smile as he pointed to an open box of Monte Cristos in the back. They weren't his usually preferred Russian cigars, but he wasn't paying for them either. Put it on my room, will ya? He said as he pulled the room key from his pocket and held it out. With a polite nod, smile, and a few swipes, the clerk rang it all up before wishing Jack a pleasant evening. Jack gathered his things and waddled slightly towards the elevators before making his way back upstairs and back down to Val's room. As he approached, he could hear Jonas wrapping up his spiel he'd already heard twice. He knocked at the door, and a few seconds later it opened to reveal Cassie standing on the other side. Jack passed her some of the chips and dips as he headed inside. Here you go, and grab a beer if you want one too, he said as he set them down atop the TV stand. Jack grabbed a few beers and tossed one to Val, who caught it, before holding one out for Jonas. Jonas thought for a moment and nodded before catching the beer as it was tossed to him. Jack picked up 2 more, holding one out to Cassie, who shook her head. From the bored expression plastered across Cassie's face, he knew Jonas had been spitting the same stuff again. Cassie cracked open a bag of tortilla chips and a can of white queso dip before beginning to munch softly as she leaned up against the TV stand next to Jack. Jack set the other beer down and opened his own, taking a long swig from the bottle as he moved to sit in the chair in front of the desk. Val was wide-eyed, but before he could ask any further questions, Jonas continued with his explanation. The individual you encountered, his name is Ballistic. He is a servant of Loki. Loki wants you because of your gifts not too dissimilar from your father's, Jonas explained. Val looked up and cocked his head to the side. You knew my dad? Jonas smiled. I know you, father. I'm sure you've heard of him as well. His name is Hephaestus. The god of the forge? Yeah, right, interrupted Val. Jonas stared at Val for a moment, completely stone-faced, before he continued. You took more after your mother, inheriting none of your father's gifts. So, you were of little concern to us until now. Who's us? Said Val with a sarcastic grin. Jonas smiled all the more. The Meridian Order. So like the secret group supposedly keeping all this stuff hush-hush, right? Jonas nodded. Correct again, Mr. Technikov. But if you don't believe me, then look for yourself. You have the ability, correct? Go ahead. Try looking into Compass Comics. It was a challenge, Val knew that. Still, it was one he wasn't going to turn up. Val narrowed his eyes and waited for a moment before staring off vacantly. The TV began to rapidly flip through internet browsers, images and lines of code. Every so often an image would appear. One Jonas always seemed to show up in whether it was an image from a college newspaper article in the 60s, a photo from World War II or the Civil War, a painting from the 1700s or earlier, and more. He was in each of them. Then there were flashes of old comic book panels from the 1940s and 50s, old second-rate knockoffs from what they looked like, forgotten comic book heroes of a bygone era. Major Ali, Snowbird, Bombshell Betty, the Minuteman, the Mystic Zohar, the Red Dragon, the Great Unknown, Greystone the world's master magician. There were dozens of them. Then old photos from World War II, mission reports, casualty records, service medals, awards, death reports. Val suddenly sat up a little straighter and his eyes shot wide. You hid stuff in comics books? You hid stuff in fucking comic books? You made people think it was fake. How much of it is made up? Is Superman real? Is Batman real? Oh, Spider-Man, you're serious. How old are you? Asked Val as he gave Jonas a look of astonishment and excitement. Jonas slowly opened his bottle and took a sip from his beer. Very. Jack rolled his eyes. Yeah, you're an old fart. I thought you said y'all weren't allowed to have anything to do with semi-gods. Cassie snickered around a mouthful of chips. Demigods, she said, sending a few crumbles flying from her mouth and onto the floor. She blushed and covered her mouth with one hand before brushing the crumbs off onto the floor. Val grinned as Jonas sighed and shook his head. Well, you're mostly correct. We aren't, but I don't always follow all of the rules, and we need help. Besides, he's not my son, said Jonas with a grin. So are they demigods too? How did you guys get your powers? And then, why do I have powers now if I didn't before? Even as Val asked the question, he was suddenly realizing that he already knew the answer. Ooh, said Val as he reached up and felt at the control crown still lodge on his head and embedded into his skull. Jack and Cassie looked confused, but Jonas just pointed to the device on Val's head. I'm fairly certain it has something to do with that Mr. Technikov. May I? Val nodded and turned to face away from Jonas as he moved up and leaned forward slightly to inspect the control crown more closely. Slowly, his deep amber eyes scanned over the device. You know, you really should cut your hair. Those things are disgusting. Val just rolled his eyes and shook his head as Cassie chuckled and munched at the chips. It was something Val had heard his mother complain about dozens of times. So how did a weird bubble boy helmet give him superpowers exactly? She said, sounding very questioning of the entire situation itself. Jonas's brow furrowed as he leaned in a bit closer. No idea how it did it. And, to answer your questions, no, he's a super soldier, a fabrication of man. Oh, gee, thanks, said Jack as he sipped on his beer and opened up another bag of chips, along with the jar of salsa. I didn't intend to insult you. If anything, it was a compliment. That serum flowing through your veins was unique, and I know it would have only been given to a uniquely qualified individual. Jack fell silent, not really knowing how to react to that, but Cassie cut in. Or he likes your Uncle Jack. Jack scoffed and Jonas grinned before saying, I've certainly worked with worse. Jonas pushed a few clumps of crimson dreadlocks aside before withdrawing and standing up rapidly. It didn't give him powers. It awakened them because of what it was made of. What? What's it made of? Asked Val, showing concern at the sudden change in tone. From what I can tell, part of a Typhonian, said Jonas with a look of disgust and hatred as he moved a half-step back from Val. And that is what? Asked Jack as he looked to Cassie, who just shook her head and shrugged before munching down on another cheese-covered tortilla chip. Val seemed to recognize the term partly, but also seemed to be as confused as to what he was specifically referring to. A parasitic species despised the galaxy over. They're an ancient race that turned themselves into monstrosities of biotechnical wizardry, all in the pursuit of perfection and power. They take over lesser species as hosts and use their bodies as frames that they bind to and take over. They use them as housings for their weapons so they can hunt, enslave, and increase their numbers. They seek eradication and deserve the same. That thing in your head, Mr. Technikov, it's alive, and it's a part of you now. That's what awakened your dormant abilities as a demigod. Val grasped the control crown and began to pull hard. He could hair tearing and feel it getting ripped out by the roots. It hurt, but not as much as the throbbing pain in the back of his head that made his vision go white. Get it off, he said over and over again as he tried to wrench the crown from his head, but it held tight. Jack was quick to move over and grab Val's arms. Whoa, easy there, man. Gonna rip your head off doing that? Val let go of the control crown as a wave of fear and despair rolled over him. Hey, look, that thing made you super smart and stuff, right? Let you control machines. Well, maybe you can use that to get it off of you. Jonas said nothing, but smiled while Cassie sat looking concerned. And if you help us out, we'll help you out, man. That's what being a part of a team's all about, right? Don't worry, we got this. Val nodded sullenly. He's right. We're all stronger together than we are apart. We need to work as a team if we want to stop Loki, and I'm sure between magic and superpowers and stuff, we can figure some way to get that thing off of your ratty melon, said Cassie. Jack shot her a look of disapproval, but Val gave a half-hearted grin and nodded. Yeah, I guess. Val lifted his beer up and took several long gulps from it, then let out a sigh and looked over to Cassie. She was good-looking. So what's your deal? Cassie just shrugged and smiled at him. Army brat, single dad, college girl. Sounds kind of familiar, said Val with a slight smile. More similar than you may realize, said Jonas with a grin. Jack and Cassie both looked to Jonas with questioning looks. I said we'd need all of the help we could get. Jack looked to Jonas. What's that supposed to mean? That sometimes the greatest tricks are the ones we play on ourselves. And the greatest lies and secrets are ones that are told to us our entire lives, or kept from us. Jack hated old sayings like that. His mum used to have a whole damn army of sayings just like this, and it always annoyed him. But he'd learned to pick up on it. He knew what Jonas was saying, but he was afraid to say it. You're saying I'm a demigod too? Asked Cassie after a long pause. Jonas's smile grew wider. Descended from one of the best. Cassie looked from Jonas over to Jack with soft, questioning eyes. Jack frowned some as his heart went out to her in her confusion, and he stood to move towards her. However, before he could cross the short distance to her, she swung. Her fist flew through the air and caught an unsuspecting Jonas right across his jaw. Her fist landed solidly across his angular jaw with a dull crack. She was expecting to break his jaw, knock him out, or maybe even knock him through a wall, but nothing happened. Jonas took the hit as his head turned to the side slightly from the force of her blow. It was far from the hardest punch he'd ever taken. Jonas let out a sigh and chewed at the air for a moment while rubbing at his jaw. Why didn't you say anything? Screamed Cassie. Jonas stood there and blinked hard a few times as he ran his fingers through his thick, curly beard, straightening the strands she'd knocked astray. Jack glared at Jonas as Cassie turned and stormed out of the room. Jack moved to go after her, but Jonas held up a hand. Let her go, he said calmly. Fuck you, growled Jack as he glared at Jonas and thought about hitting him himself. But he didn't. Instead, he moved forwards to push past him, but Jonas grabbed him by the shoulder firmly, but not aggressively. She'll be fine. She needs a chance to cool off. What's she most likely going to do right now, and how could you help? Asked Jonas. Jack stopped and thought for a moment. He wanted to hit Jonas, but he pushed aside his anger. She's probably going to go for a walk or something, or go hide in the room and call her dad. And I could be a good uncle and support her. Then when she's ready, give her that support. For now, let her talk alone with her father. We have other matters to attend to at the moment. Jack, we're assembling an army. That's why you're here, to train them and lead that army. You have the training, you have the skills, you have the capabilities, you have the experience, and now you have 2 new trainees to put through basic. Wait, what? Said Val as he looked back and forth at the two, feeling rather confused and awkward about the whole situation unfolding. You made an oath, Jack, and you can't do this alone. Loki isn't going to stop. We need to fight back. James E. Thomas. Chapter 20, Man in Motion. After the big talk with Jonas, Jack headed down to the hotel bar to get a drink. He told Val they'd start training tomorrow morning, early. Jack found no solace from the half-dozen or more pint glasses he'd downed while seated at the bar. Even more annoying was he couldn't even smoke inside anymore. Recent changes every damned state had been going through. The most annoying thing, though, was that Jonas was right. He couldn't get drunk. He sat outside by the pool, puffing away at a cigar and downing his 8th frosted glass of craft beer when Cassie came through the double-glass doors, wrapped in a purple hoodie that had Princess emblazoned across the front in rhinestones and a pair of black sweatpants and flip-flops. Her dark hair still wet from the shower, and he could smell her perfume-heavy body wash coming from her. He wrinkled his nose at the scent. Cassie rolled her eyes as she saw the look on Jack's face as he walked over and plopped down into a sun chair next to his. "Oh, shut it." "I didn't say anything," said Jack with a smirk before polishing off the bottom of his beer and then taking a slow puff from his cigar. "So what's up, Wonder Woman?" said Jack with a soft smile. Cassie pouted some and sighed before smirking a little. "I called Dad." "Yeah," said Jack as he waited for more information. "And he said that he met Mom while he was serving just before the Gulf War broke out. Some kind of top-secret thing he wouldn't discuss." "But," Cassie let out a long sigh, "they worked in intelligence and logistics together. Nothing I hadn't heard before. He loves her very much. He wishes she was still around." And Jack pressed her for more info. Cassie rolled her eyes in annoyance and shot him daggers with her eyes. "And he said he was sorry he didn't tell me. That he loves her very much. She was the only woman he was ever with, and he was the only man she was ever with. Not much else. He said now that I know he'll get in contact with her so we can try to talk, and that he'll explain more when he comes back. He said that he's busy right now dealing with the situation in Washington." Jack frowned. Steve was a good father, but he always lacked a bit in the parental front, being a bit of an absentee dad at times. But he was a single dad holding down a high-level government job to support his daughter. "Look, Cassie, I'm sure your dad is just dealing with whatever shit storm this is kicking off in DC. You think the feds don't know about this? They do. They just aren't going to let people know. I mean, I have superpowers now, and I barely believe all of the BS that spews out of Jonas's mouth. Your dad loves you, and I'm sure he wouldn't intentionally hurt you ever. We're your family." Cassie nodded but said nothing as he pulled her knees in close and wrapped her arms around them. "Find out anything else about your mom?" he asked. "Dad said I looked like her, but I already knew that. And he said that her leaving us was the hardest thing she'd ever had to do, that I was her only little girl, and that she loved me very much," she said, as her arms hugged her legs to her tighter. "I'm sure she does," Jack reassured her. "Then why the hell did she leave?" Cassie half screamed out in anger and heartache. Jack frowned and sat silently for a moment, puffing at his cigar as Cassie tried to choke back tears. "Cassie, I don't have any good answers for this. Maybe it was too dangerous for her to stay. I mean, imagine what kind of target that would have put on you. If Loki is going after all of the different people with powers, then he probably would have come after you too. I mean, your dad's a smart guy, and I'm sure your mom is a smart gal from the sounds of it. So my guess is they did all of this to keep you safe and let you live a happy, normal life. I mean, if you had known, then you wouldn't have had a normal life. Think how crazy things have been since this all started." Cassie sat silently for a moment, but looked up and nodded. "Yeah, I guess. You want a beer or anything? Chocolate ice cream?" Cassie smiled a bit at the kind gesture from her godfather, but shook her head. "Nah, just brushed my teeth. And I'm beat after the drive today. I think I'll just hit the hay." Jack gave a reassuring half-smile and a nod. "All right, sounds good. Probably going to bed soon myself. We all got to be up early for training before hitting the road." Cassie scrunched up her eyebrows and tilted her head to the side a bit. "What for?" Jack grinned. "Well, I don't see Loki around here. And besides me, you, Jonas, and that wimpy-looking fella upstairs, I don't see any other supers around. Plus, gotta whip you all into shape." "Hey, I am in shape." "Yeah, but you don't know what your powers are or nothing, or if you even have 'em. We gotta figure that out. And besides, if we're fighting someone, we gotta be ready for it. And you and Val both need training. Plus, I'm pretty sure Jonas is gonna tell us to hit the road again tomorrow morning. I think I'm starting to figure out how he thinks." Cassie chuckled and smiled, making a grin crack across Jack's face. Got it all figured out, huh? Jack took a puff on his cigar and leaned back. Yup, well, I am a super soldier after all, right? Gotta whip y'all into shape. See you at 500. Cassie let out a groan, but knew that there was no point in arguing with Jack when it came to things like this. Yeah. See you in the morning, Uncle Jack. Love you, said Cassie before leaning over and giving him a swift peck on the cheek and a side hug before standing and walking off. Jack sat in silence and finished off his cigar before tamping it out in the large, transparent glass ashtray seated on the wooden tabletop beside his sun chair. He cast his gaze up to the stars, wondering if all of this was real, or perhaps some fever dream, and he was still laying in the hospital bed. His gaze shifted over towards the butt of the Monte Cristo resting in the ashtray. Nah, if this was a dream, the cigar would have been from Pogar. Jack awoke at 4:30 the next morning before brushing his teeth, washing his face, and then getting changed into his old olive-green shorts, matching t-shirt and his running shoes. He headed next door and pounded at the door. Cassie, wake up. Go time. He listened for a moment and could make out the groans of Cassie and the sounds of the mattress shifting as she rolled over before standing. Okay. Meet you downstairs. 10 minutes, came Cassie's voice from the other side of the door. Jack turned and headed down the hallway towards Jonas' room before pounding on the door. Hey, asshole. Up and at 'em. Training time. There was a very disgruntled growl that came from the other side of the door, then a few heavy footfalls towards the door before it was flung open. Jonas was standing there, entirely in the nude, making Jake immediately look away. Not something one wanted to see first thing in the morning. Oh, Jesus, put on a robe, man. I am over 12,000 years old. I don't need training, they do. Come back when you're done, he said before slamming the door in Jack's face. Jack blinked hard and shook his head to dislodge that from his memory before turning and heading further down the hallway to Val's room. Bum bum da da, sang the superhero avatar, now dressed as James Bond. He's coming, the conspiracy theorist persona yelled with a star. Ugh, register him as a sex offender, it's too early, groaned the villainous avatar as he lay sleeping at his desk. Sir, I do believe we have company. Mr. Jack is here. The more gentlemanly avatar altered Val. Huh? What? Asked Val. Pound. Up and at 'em, kid. Time to whoop that scrawny ass of yours into shape. Val's lime-green eyes shot open, and he groaned in a daze as he looked about. He could taste the old beer on his breath and smell it on himself and the bed from sweating it out over the course of the night. He'd partaken in several of the bottles left by Jack the previous night after everyone had left. Why let good booze go to waste, especially when he needed a drink? Never mind, just kill yourself. That taste is awful. God, we smell like ass, the villainous voice growled. Go away, Val called out, speaking to both Jack and the voices in his head. Pound. Come on, kid, get up. There's an easy way and a hard way to this. Either you're getting up and getting your ass out here for a run and some exercise, or I'm kicking in the door and dragging you out. Pretty sure Jonas can cover that too. Jack hadn't meant it, not really. Jonas probably could cover it, but he wasn't going to trash a hotel. His mama taught him better than that. Pound. Get the fuck up before the hotel gets pissed, kid. Pretty sure I'm already getting a complaint, boomed Jack through the door. Val now had his head sandwiched between two pillows, but could still hear the raucous shouting of that Texas twang. He let out a long sigh and groaned before tossing the pillow off of the bed and onto the floor as he sat up. Okay, I'm coming. He groaned weakly before smacking his mouth. Good, see you downstairs in 10 minutes. Don't make me come back up here and drag your ass out, called out Jack before heading downstairs to wait outside the hotel. He got more than a few looks from the early morning staff as he passed by, giving them a courteous nod as he passed. Cassie showed up on time. She was used to this sort of thing after being around Jack for so many years. Plus, she'd had to do early morning practices for the various sports she'd been involved in over the years. Val showed up a few minutes later, eye-glazed and still wearing the same shorts and Bob Marley t-shirt from the previous day. Val was not used to this sort of thing. After a quick round of stretches, Jack broke them in with a brisk jog. Jack trotted easily alongside them, not breaking a sweat at all as his heartbeat stayed calm and steady. Cassie jogged along at an even pace, sweating in the early morning sun as it began to crest over the desert. Good job, Cassie, but pick up the pace. You ain't some dainty princess, you're a superhero. Now run, called out Jack. Cassie groaned but picked up the pace as she took off ahead. Meanwhile, Val wasn't doing so hot. He staggered along at an uneven pace, panting heavily as his legs screamed at him. Sweat poured down his head and dripped from his mess of tangled crimson dreadlock, drenching his shirt and making it cling to him as he gasped for air. Come on, Mr. Wizard, run. I want to see you short out that fucking stupid tiara you're wearing and make it fall off your head. Come on, run. I don't think we all have the same powers here, man. I can't do this, Val gasped out. Bullshit. You're a superhero like the rest of us. Now quit your whimpering and run. Make those scrawny legs scream. Now run, whiz kid. Healthy body leads to a healthy mind, and you can do better. Now run. Come on, Jack encouraged Val as he easily kept pace with him. Val pressed on, following after the two of them for the remainder of the 2K run before they finally arrived back at the hotel sometime later. Val stumbled over to the bushes and hurled into them, making Jack grimace and frown. Good job, man. Go get yourself some water and get cleaned up. We'll meet you for breakfast. Val panted and grabbed at his stomach as he shot Jack a questioning look before nodding and heading inside through the sliding glass doors and up to his room for a shower. Cassie just smiled and shook her head as she looked over to Val walking away. Got your work cut out with him. So when are you going to show us how to fight? Soon, just as soon as he ain't puking up his guts, and we ain't on the road, said Jack as he watched Val leave with a questioning stare. Cassie patted Jack on the arm. Well, just make sure it's soon. If this is a fight, I want to win it, she said with a grin before heading inside. See you at breakfast, she called back over her shoulder to Jack. Yup, Jack called back. During their jog, Jack had seen a local clothing store nearby, so he took the time to quickly head over there, making sure to not run too fast, but at a very impressive pace for a normal jogger. He ducked inside and grabbed a few sets of clothes for him and for Val before heading back to the hotel. By the time he got back, the scent of bacon, eggs, sausage, and more had his stomach growling. He followed his nose to the breakfast buffet the hotel had set up. Spotting Cassie, Val, and Jonas seated a round table off in a corner of the room. Cassie was showered and dressed along with Jonas, who was immaculately groomed as always. But Val was seated wrapped in the fluffy robe from the night before. Jack headed over and set two of the bags down next to the table. There you go. Figured those flip-flops and t-shirt ain't gonna work every day. Ain't much, and I ain't sure it's gonna fit you, man. But figure it's better than nothing. Val was sipping at some orange juice and nibbling at a bit of fruit, but did have a small plate of eggs, sausage, and a waffle in front of him, and he'd obviously showered but had nothing to change into. He looked at the bags for a second and leaned over to peek into the top of one. Really? Thanks, dude. I appreciate that. Jack nodded and was about to turn to grab his plate of food when Jonas spoke up. We need to leave soon. We've got a long way to go today. Jack rolled his eyes as he turned to the table once more. Cassie was looking up at with a knowing smirk as Jack looked to Jonas with an expression of pure sarcasm. Oh, really? Where to this time, Miss Daisy? Val nearly choked on his juice as Cassie snickered while Jonas just shook his head disapprovingly and added, Chicago.